1. A rabbit and a fox. And, you've read that summary correctly. This is indeed a kaguya Naruto one-shot smiley face. Okay. So, I've always wanted to do a kaguya Naruto just because it's so unique and different. And I'm a trash FF author, so I figured, why the not? So here we are. I am not sure if I will continue this one shot, but you are free to ask anyway because I know you're going to do it anyway. We will see. This version of kaguya will be different than the canon version by a fair amount. Mostly because the canon version of kaguya was garbage. Merged with the jubi, which means I lost all sense of emotions and have become a husk of an alien that wants all chakra. Whack. So boom. New kaguya. That's about it. Enjoy the one shot. Or don't. Wee woo wee woo. Join the bloody damn Discord server. Invite code is STPC 5 volts. Disclaimer. Juice WRLD, lucid dreams. The touch of a goddess. Something no mortal man should ever trifle with or cross. A simple touch and or glance would send you spiraling into an abyss of insanity. The touch of a goddess. Blessings are spared for those who cross paths with a woman who could rip the world asunder without a care in the world. The touch of a goddess. You are told stories as a child about beings like Kaguya Otsutsuki. Individuals that can create stars. Create moons. Control time and space. But you often wrote them off as fairy tales due to the sheer incredulity of it all. You cannot understand something if you have not experienced it. You cannot believe something if you have not witnessed it. The touch of a goddess. Sasuke. This isn't good. Silence. Horrible, awful silence. Azure eyes focused intently on the being that was floating not but several feet from off the ground. A beautiful creature that only the primordials of old could have possibly created. A woman. No. No. She was no woman. Sasuke. Hey, answer me. The individual tried again. Naruto. Shut up. The now named Naruto grit his teeth in silence at the reserved tone of his best friend. He did not wish to relinquish his gaze on the goddess that stood before him, but he was aware of the inner turmoil that was circulating in Sasuke. He wasn't confident either. Naruto had to physically stop his hands from shaking as the pale-skinned woman finally moved. Her white tresses swung gracefully as her head snapped towards their position. And she stared, and stared, and stared, and stared. Before finally, Tenji, the pale-skinned goddess, questioned quietly with a hint of sorrow. Naruto belatedly realized that the woman was staring directly at him instead of Sasuke. His spine tingled and his fingers nervously clenched at the presence of this woman bearing her will upon him. Naruto swallowed nervously as the woman's eyes narrowed in sadness while a sorrowful expression morphed upon her face. Her tiny eyebrows knit together as her eyes glistened. Who was Tenji? Even now, you stand defiant. That sorrow-filled expression slowly tapered off as a morose one took its place. I did what I believed was right. Yet still, you judge me so. Naruto swallowed nervously once more as he glanced towards Sasuke, who was anxiously gripping his kusanagi. Before Naruto could speak, he was interrupted by another. Mother, that is not Tenge. The creature was silenced from continuing as the pale-skinned goddess flared her chakra. The world felt the woman's power as it spread across the globe, swallowing it whole and drowning it in a pit of despair. Naruto felt his heart clench painfully and had to resist the urge to drop to his knees. What is this? Madara Uchiha hadn't even been this powerful. This woman was on a whole other level. Silence. She whispered venomously as her eyes shifted towards the blob of black chakra. The veins around her eyes became pronounced as she stared at Zetsu. He is Tenji, holding the power of my sons. She continued after a moment of silence. I would never forget those eyes. She finished somberly. Naruto swallowed his anxiety before exhaling softly. He began to slowly control his breathing as he pushed all of the negative emotions pouring out of the goddess away. Once calmed, he placed his hand atop Sasuke's shoulder and began to channel his chakra through his friend, calming him down as well. The blonde teen nodded to his friend, who returned the gesture with his own nod. He slowly shifted his attention back to the floating goddess before tugging on his ruined mesh shirt. The material was barely clinging atop his torso and was riddled with holes and tears. His orange pants were torn and shredded with several tears across the thighs and was only covering the bottom of his knees. Glancing towards Sasuke, he nodded his head before flaring his own chakra. A golden shroud of chakra ignited around his body, surrounding him in an ethereal glow that rivaled the sun. A peaceful aura settled in the area as Naruto's chakra countered the onslaught of depressing and negative emotions pouring out from Kaguya. His presence, so bright and loving, was a stark contrast to the presence that Kaguya exuded. 7 pitch-black orbs slowly materialized behind Naruto's back before swirling in a hypnotic pattern. One of the orbs slowly left its synced formation before floating atop Naruto's hand. The Gudodama began to morph and change its shape entirely, changing into a thin staff and spinning rapidly. Naruto glanced at the object before grasping the weapon and twirling it in his hand. He exhaled once last time before staring directly into the goddess' eyes. I don't know who Tenji is, but he sounds like someone important to you. The woman did not respond to the statement, choosing to stare at who she believed was her lover reincarnated. Naruto glanced at his best friend, giving him a look and nodding quietly. An unspoken conversation happened and Sasuke loosened his grip on his kusanagi. The golden shrouded teen rested his staff against his shoulder before speaking again. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. Super Gramps spoke about you. He said you were an emotionless monster. Naruto detected the shift of emotions instantly. Her somber expression remained, but Naruto could sense the anger lurking beneath. The woman began to slowly descend, but not once did her eyes stray away from Naruto. But that's not true, is it? He questioned rhetorically with hardened eyes. She did not answer. I sense far too many emotions coming from you. Sadness, anger, regret. His eyebrows furrowed as he continued speaking. Unlike Madara, you actually understand what you're doing. Kaguya was silent for what felt like hours before her head tilted. You even speak like him. There was a horrible silence that followed her statement, and the next action surprised even Naruto himself. I will not make the same mistake twice. Naruto's unique eyes widened to an impossible degree as the pale-skinned woman appeared in front of him. What? When did she move? He would never get his answer. Naruto. Naruto idly heard Sasuke's scream before a cone of black surrounded his vision, cutting off all light and depriving him of all his senses. I will correct the mistake that you made. After I cleanse this world we will be together again, Tenji. I promise you. Naruto heard Kaguya's voice but was unable to pinpoint it. Everywhere he looked was black. Black, black, black. Hate, sadness, loneliness, anger, rage, depression. Every emotion that he had conquered during his rigorous training to become a sage slammed into him with a force that resembled one of Tsunade's overpowered punches. These weren't his emotions. Naruto closed his eyes maybe, and began to focus on the turmoil that was swirling around inside Kaguya. Normally, he'd be freaking out and screaming about how unfair life was, but now wasn't the time. He could still think, and while he wasn't entirely sure about what was happening, he assumed that he was in Kaguya's subconscious, or at least some part of it. He knew he was cut off from the outside world in some fashion, but he was still able to think. And that's all he needed. Okay. Think. Shit. Was he even thinking? Idiot. He began to channel his chakra as his breathing became slower. His hands slowly clasped together and he tilted his head down. He needed to be calm here. Sasuke was relying on him. So was the rest of the world. There goes the anxiety. Breathe. In. Out. I'll be surprised if you can escape this shithole. Naruto ignored the voice of his partner and tried to sense his surroundings. He was awarded with absolutely nothing, and it was only slightly annoying. Okay. So that wasn't going to work. Breathe. In. Out. His blonde locks jostled as he tilted his head. Breathe. In. Out. Ah. Her emotions. Naruto flared his chakra, at least believing to do so, and latched onto Kaguya's emotions. He sifted through the waves of negative emotions with little trouble and came upon something unique. He couldn't describe what he was sensing due to the lack of actual senses, but if he could, then he'd compare it to a ribbon. A ribbon that was attached to another ribbon and vice versa. Breathe. In. Out. Naruto exhaled quietly before tugging on the ribbon. Nothing. Huh. Well, that didn't he. A brilliant flash of white light exploded in front of his face. His eyes instinctively shut due to the action. There was silence for several moments before he heard a familiar voice, though this time it was not layered in sadness but in anger. Ishiki. Naruto slowly opened his eyes at the woman's exclamation before tilting his head with a perplexed expression. He blinked in confusion several times at the scene playing out in front of him. Was this a memory? A vastly different-looking Kaguya was glaring hatefully at another pale-skinned man. The man's face was shrouded in darkness, but Naruto could make out a single horn that wrapped around the man's head starting from the right ear and curling behind his head. He wore an incredibly high-collared kimono that was open at the chest, revealing his pale skin and toned physique. His kimono was white and lacked any kind of design on the front. Princess Kaguya, so frail and pathetic. Ishiki mocked cruelly. Still running from Momoshiki, are you? Ha 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 ha. Kaguya's glare became vicious, but she did not challenge the man. How did you find me? The pale-skinned man slowly circled Kaguya. An action that caused the woman to tremble in fear. How? Easy. You're shit at covering tracks. He snorted loudly before placing his fingers atop the woman's shoulder. Momoshiki requested I deliver you to him. Ishiki ignored the woman's terrified expression as his hand squeezed her shoulder painfully. But his eyes met hers and a sick smile formed on his face. I enjoy watching you suffer like the vermin you are. So, go. Run. Run like your life depends on it. He relinquished his hold on the woman's shoulder before roughly shoving the woman away. Run, little Kaguya, run. The woman spared no time and immediately ran as fast as she could. Her form was a blur to even Naruto, and he had to strain his eyes to keep the woman in his sights. Several seconds passed by in silence before the pale-skinned man laughed loudly. Oh, Momoshiki, you really botched this one up, didn't you? Urashiki won't be pleased. After his statement, the man seemed to just disintegrate into nothing. His form becoming nothing more than dust and soot as his presence vanished. Ishiki, Momoshiki, Urashiki. There were more of these beings. Beings that scared Kaguya. Naruto clenched his eyes shut and gripped his hair tightly as he tried to stop the mental breakdown that was about to unfold. If they dealt with Kaguya, and that's a big if, then they would have to deal with 3 other people just like Kaguya. What the hell? Is this some sort of sick joke? Naruto yelped in surprise as another brilliant flash of white exploded in front of him. His arms crossed in front of his face, shielding him from the bright assault on his vision. Once the light faded, he slowly lowered his arms and tilted his head with a curious expression. Do you really have to leave, Tenji-kun? Naruto's eyes widened as he stared at the fair-skinned man named Tenji. He sported black hair and wore his hair in a unique fashion. He had a straw-like headband that wrapped around his forehead and wore a string necklace that sported a Magatama medallion. Tenji smiled softly as he turned towards his lover before speaking. I have to, my love. These peace discussions are necessary. Kaguya sighed quietly as her gaze searched the floor. The land of that are barbarians. They cannot see reason and only think with violence. Gentle hands settled atop Kaguya's own as the man kneeled in front of his lover. We will never know if we never try, Kaguya-chan. Isn't peace what you want? Her white orbs stared into his for several seconds before she averted her gaze shyly. She nodded her head before speaking softly. Of course, but at the risk of your life. What if you get killed? Tenji rubbed his lover's hands softly before smiling once more, so bright and loving. Then that is the risk I take for what I believe in. I will find peace. Do you know why, my love? A small smile formed on Kaguya's face as her eyes slowly rose and centered on his. Because you never go back on your word. The man nodded with a grin before closing his eyes and slowly leaning towards his lover. His lips gently molded against Kaguya's as she pulled his body against hers. Naruto stared at the scene playing out in front of him with mixed emotions. He was aware of the uncanny similarities that he and the man named Tenji shared. Never going back on their word. Check. Wanting peace. Check. Willing to put their life on the line for their people and their home. Check. Willing to speak with their enemies to achieve peace. Check. He now understood, to some degree, why Kaguya had called him Tenji. But she didn't actually know him. How had she systemically broken him down with a mere glance? How could she have possibly known about the similarities that he shared with her late lover? It didn't make sense. I would never forget those eyes. That, Auntie Tsunade Kami rest her soul used to say that the eyes were the window to the soul. So maybe, she saw his soul. That was, Before he could ponder the idea further, another flash of light erupted in front of him. This time it did not bother Naruto and he weathered the bright light. Once the bright lights died down, a heavy frown formed on Naruto's face. Why did you betray me, Tenji? Kaguya now resembled the form he had first saw her in when taking over Madara's body. Why? Why did you do it? Was peace more important than your love? I loved you. I put you first. Above everything. She screamed hoarsely as tears poured down her face. They attacked me and you punish me. Me. After everything I've done for you. Her tears dripped down her chin and pooled on Tenji's face. His form was unmoving and still and his gaze was completely blank. Kaguya gripped the man's wrist before placing it on her stomach and crying loudly. Why you made me do it, Tenji. See, can you feel them? Your children. You would have killed your pregnant lover. She screamed out into the heavens for several minutes as rain began to slowly descend from the sky. Naruto's eyes narrowed sadly as he stared at Kaguya, feeling every single emotion. It assaulted his core and burrowed deep within his chest. He didn't even notice the tears that were slowly sliding down his cheeks. Why was this affecting him so much? He didn't even know Kaguya existed and only found out a couple hours before fighting Madara. Why was this bothering him? Why was he so invested in her life now? Seeing some of her most intimate and important memories deep within her mind. Was this the reason? Possibly. Naruto began to wipe his eyes and slowly moved closer towards Kaguya. Her forehead rested against the man's chest and she sobbed in a pitiful manner. A manner he wouldn't have suspected from such a powerful individual. It made him realize that she wasn't all that different from humans. That she had emotions and that she felt just as harshly as everyone else. Her suffering was no less severe than others. She felt, and she hurt. But, the way Hagoromo spoke about her depicted her as some evil monster incapable of being reasoned with. Naruto just couldn't see that. The details that Super Gramps had left him with had painted a very vivid picture about the woman Kaguya was supposed to be. An emotionless husk of her former self hell-bent on the destruction of the world by subjugating the populace and reclaiming chakra as her own. But, that's not what he could sense. She was a broken woman. Molded by the harsh and unforgiving reality that unfolded before her. Even now, watching this scene with her late lover was a painful reminder that negative experiences shape who you become as a person. Your ideals could shift at the drop of a hat and you'd be oblivious to the changes. Naruto could relate to Kaguya. He certainly sympathized with her. But he sympathized with everyone. It was just the kind of person he was. He always saw the good in people. That's not to say that he didn't ignore the evil in people, but he didn't want to be a person that judged others off of one action. Everyone was capable of evil in this world. Everyone. Even he was capable of it. Learning that Auntie Tsunade had passed during Nagato's initial attack had almost broken him. His heart still hurt to this day and he doubted it would ever truly go away. He had wanted to truly kill Nagato. To make the man pay for hurting one of the single most important people in his life. And he almost had. He had seized the man by his throat and would have snapped it had it not been for Conan. She had begged and pleaded. Begged, pleaded. At the time it only made him angrier. Why was this woman pleading for this monster's life? Did she not witness him just kill thousands of innocents? With no remorse. And she was willing to beg and plead for his life. What stayed his hand was the teachings that Jiraiya had bestowed on him. Killing in vengeance would never bring back that which you lost. Auntie Tsunade wouldn't have wanted him to see him like that. She knew him more than others did. The mother he never had. Naruto slowly fell to his knees and placed his hands atop his thighs. He stared at Kaguya's sobbing form for several long minutes before slowly raising his hand and reaching out to her. His hand didn't make contact with her body and just floated through her. A small frown formed on his face as he retracted his hand away from the goddess. I swear to you, Tenji. The woman spoke softly through muffled sobs. I will do everything in my power to make this world a better place. She sniffled quietly before laying a gentle kiss atop the man's lips. When she raised her head, she almost seemed to stare directly at Naruto. as if she was somehow seeing him. Naruto met her gaze and could physically see the changes that were being made. This was the experience that changed who Kaguya was as an individual. Changed her into the monster that Hagoromo believed she was. But Naruto knew better. He didn't agree with her methods because they were inhumane, but he understood her. Understood why she was doing this. Understood the lengths she had taken and would eventually take for her goal. Another flash of white light exploded around his form and Naruto shielded his eyes. He was silent for several moments before slowly removing his arms from around his face. His cerulean orbs traveled around his surroundings in slight awe. Iridescent lights shone brightly in an empty void of space. There were no distinguishable shapes or landmarks, but beautiful colors cascaded all around him. He slowly rose to his feet while taking in this vast amount of empty space. You understand me? Naruto's eyes widened as he swiveled on his heel, coming face to face with Kaguya. The horned goddess was several feet away and was staring at him with half-lidded eyes. Naruto was silent for several moments as he realized that this wasn't a memory. This was real now. He licked his lips quietly before responding. Yes, I do. Kaguya took a single step forward. But you do not agree. Naruto slowly shook his head with a small frown. No, I don't. This isn't the way. Kaguya took another step forward. If you understand, then you know that this is the only way. A hardened expression began to form on his face as he crossed his arms against his chest. No, Kaguya, it isn't. You've given up your humanity. She took another step closer, slowly closing the distance between them. I was never human to begin with. Naruto shook his head, uncaring of that fact. It didn't matter if she was a human or not, she had emotion and was capable of reason. You don't need to be human to know right from wrong. Kaguya, you know this isn't right. Kaguya's head slowly shook, causing her long tresses to sway to and fro. Her eyes closed and a sad smile formed on her face. She took yet another step closer. I know it isn't right. But it's the path that I've already chosen. Naruto frowned heavily as he responded. You can change, Kaguya. You can't make the world a better place like this. You're taking away the freedom that we have. That isn't peace. It's subjugation. Her sad smile strained for a moment as her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Her head shook as she took another step towards Naruto, now standing within reaching distance. Tears slowly slid down her face as an aura of indescribable sadness wafted off her. It slammed into Naruto, who weathered the harsh emotions without strain. How else can I save a world plagued by hate and death? The goddess asked rhetorically, not expecting an answer. This time it was Naruto who took a step towards Kaguya. His taller stature slightly towering over the horned goddess. His hand extended towards the woman as a gentle smile formed on his face. Through love and understanding, he answered softly with a smile so bright that it quite literally lit the world ablaze around them, changing the surrounding colors to warm colors of red and orange. Kaguya's eyes roamed around the empty void of space as Naruto's presence began to wash away her negative emotions. His bright and loving aura settling around her and to slowly wash away all of her fears and doubts. A pained expression formed on Kaguya's face as she faltered. She took half a step away from the 17-year-old as she responded. I can't. And no. Mankind is poison. Naruto's expression did not change in the slightest as he took a full step towards Kaguya. He now stood directly in front of her with only a couple of inches separating them. Do you truly believe that, Kaguya? Or is it the pain speaking? Naruto's aura slammed into Kaguya with the weight of 1,000 suns and showed no signs of stopping. Her will faltered for a brief moment as she basked in the calming aura of his chakra. Tears began to slowly slide down her beautiful face as she stared into his cerulean pupils. Her face scrunched up painfully as she whispered in a pitiful tone, trying desperately to avoid his intoxicating aura. And no. Stop. Please. Naruto's eyes crinkled slightly as his smile grew softer. His arms slowly encircled around her form and he ignored her pitiful attempts of escape. Trust me, Kaguya. I know it's scary, but believe me when I say it. I can change this world and I will change it. He squeezed her tightly and noticed that she had stopped resisting his hold. Do ya know why I won't give up? Kaguya did not respond as tears flowed freely down her face. Her eyes clenched shut as she buried her face into the boy's chest, knowing exactly what he was going to say. Because I never go back on my word. After those words, the surrounding world seemed to just crumble apart. The colors began to slowly deteriorate and disintegrate, and a ginormous flash of white light exploded around Kaguya and Naruto. Sasuke huffed loudly as sweat cascaded down his body. His mismatched pupils glanced towards Kaguya from the safety of his perfect Susanoo, and he breathed in heavily. "Come on, Naruto. Hurry up and finish whatever you're doing," he mentally shouted in his mind. He had been battling with Kaguya for the better part of an hour and had not once managed to get a hit on her. Even despite the distractions that Naruto was no doubt causing in her mind, he couldn't hit her. Her power was something to behold. Perhaps with Naruto at his side he would have stood a better chance. Sasuke sighed quietly as a bow formed in the hands of his Susanoo. The titanic construct of chakra pulled on the strings of the ranged weapon as a mass of black fire formed into an arrow. The flames of Amaterasu burned with a thirst that was incapable of being quenched. Sasuke's Rinnegan pulsed as the flames became chaotic. He mentally ordered his Susanoo to draw the bow back even further before taking aim at the goddess. Enten, Susanoo Kagutsuchi. The arrow was released a moment later as a sonic boom exploded out from Sasuke's position, destroying mountains and completely eviscerating the terrain surrounding him. Kaguya made no move to dodge the attack and only stared at the rapidly approaching flaming arrow. Her head tilted before the arrow struck her chest. There was a brief lull of silence before the arrow exploded in a tornado of swirling flames. It spun with such force that the terrain surrounding Kaguya was immediately reduced to ash. Sasuke roared loudly and clenched his fist as the tornado of Amaterasu imploded on itself. A gargantuan amount of smoke and ash exploded outwards, covering the skies and darkening the world even further. The last remaining Uchiha waited with bated breath, and his heart stopped for a single moment as Kaguya slowly floated out of the smokescreen with nary singe nor burn. What the? Sasuke's hands clenched so tightly that blood began to seep out from his palms. This just couldn't be real. His first solid attack on the woman did absolutely nothing. She was literally walking it off. Was it truly helpless? Did he truly not stand a chance against her? Sasuke's teeth gnashed together as his Susanoo slowly disappeared. The titanic construct of chakra slowly deteriorated as Sasuke slowly floated towards the charred earth. Sweat pooled at his feet, slowly dripping down his face and splashing into the ground quietly. The goddess did not advance and only continued to blankly stare at his form. What was she doing? He got his answer as a black portal appeared directly behind her. She slowly floated into the portal as she completely disappeared. His eyes widened as her presence completely disappeared. Sasuke extended his senses as far as he could, trying to pinpoint her exact location. It was over before he could even react. A dainty hand gripped his chin as his body completely froze in place. Sasuke's heart skipped a beat as the woman slowly exited from the small tear in space directly in front of him. He hadn't even sensed her. Had Sasuke been in control of his body, then he would have furrowed his eyebrows at the saddened expression on the woman's face. She was crying. Why? He felt her fingers gingerly caress his cheeks, and she made no move to strike him down. Why was she doing this? She had him dead to rights. Why wasn't she finishing him off? And why the hell was crying? Please, stop. He heard her plead softly. Was she even talking to him? It didn't feel like it. It was almost as if she was speaking with someone else. Because you never go back on your word. Sasuke felt Kaguya's chakra flare up, and not a second later did a bright flash of light explode from her body. He was blasted away the woman and skipped along the ground several times. He rolled a few moments before ripping his kusanagi out of its sheath and stabbing it into the ground. Both of his hands gripped the handle of his blade, and he slowly rose to one knee while raising his gaze towards the dust that was kicked up from Kaguya's position. His chest rose and fell slowly as he tried to peer into the smoke and dust with his dujutsu. His eyes widened exponentially as he finally managed to peer into the dust. He spotted Naruto with his arms wrapped around Kaguya, comforting her. The woman's arms were gripping the back of his ruined mesh shirt, and her head was resting against his chest. Her body was shaking and trembling ever so slightly while Naruto sported a soft smile. Sasuke continued to watch the two interact and made no move to interfere. Naruto had this handled. Hopefully. Kaguya wasn't attacking, so that was a good indicator, though the woman seemed a little too intimate with Naruto. Sasuke mentally shook his head at the thought. It wasn't his business. If the woman wasn't attacking, then he didn't care what was happening. The ebony-haired teen sighed quietly before relinquishing his hold on his weapon. He dropped to the ground with one of his hands supporting his upper body. A relieved expression formed on his face afterwards as he began to calm his rapidly beating heart. He needed a damn break. Naruto hadn't gotten his ass kicked by this woman, and he was only slightly envious of this fact. Damn idiot. Naruto rubbed Kaguya's back for several more moments before speaking quietly. Do you trust me, Kaguya? The horned goddess' claws raked through the boy's destroyed shirt before she wordlessly nodded. How could she not? She had connected with him and had showed him the most intimate moments in her life. The experiences that had made her who she was. He understood her. He knew that she wasn't the monster that her beloved sons had believed she was. He sympathized, empathized, and didn't judge her for doing what she believed was the right choice. He shared the same goal that she did. He wanted to make the world a better place. And that's all that Kaguya had ever wanted. And it was precisely this reason that Kaguya couldn't stay here. I trust that you can make the world a better place. Her voice was soft as she clutched the boy's mesh shirt. Please, make my dream a reality. Naruto slowly pulled away from Kaguya as he detected the shift in emotions dwelling inside her. A small frown tugged at his face as he spoke. You make it sound like you're not going to be here to see it. The horned goddess pulled away from the warmth that the boy provided with a melancholy expression. Her white orbs trailed towards Sasuke for a moment before returning back to Naruto. Because I won't. You will be the one to finish what I started. The 17-year-old furrowed his eyebrows as he shook his head. Why can't you stay? Why would you want to leave? This is your dream. Something you've always wanted. You can help me, he supplied in a more upbeat tone towards the end. Kaguya shook her head with a sad smile. This boy, he was too bright, too kind for his own good. He was ignoring all of the horrendous actions that she was responsible for. But that's who he was as a person. He had forgiven the man who had killed his mentor and mother figure. Forgiven the man who was responsible for his parents' death. Forgiven all of the people who had spit on him when he was but a mere babe. Even forgiving the boy who had nearly killed him on multiple occasions and who he now called brother. She had seen his entire life just as he had seen hers. Watching him grow from that depressed and lonely boy to the kind and caring man that now stood before her. She knew Naruto inside and out, which made this all the more painful to do. I would want nothing more than to witness our dream become reality. But I do not deserve it. I must atone for all the sins I committed. She shook her head before turning away from Naruto and staring at the countless cocoons that harbored all of mankind. I do not deserve happiness after all I've done. Naruto frowned at the woman's tone before countering. Everyone deserves to be happy and everyone deserves a second chance. Kaguya just shook her head before slowly walking away from Naruto, ignoring his beautiful eyes. Perhaps they do. But not I. I was aware of the atrocities of my actions and I will atone for them. She stated out into the vast valley of cocoons with a saddened expression. Please, seal me once more and undo the damage that I've created. Naruto took a step forward and was about to speak before feeling a hand on his shoulder. He turned his head towards the source and spotted his best friend who was staring at him with a small frown. The two teens continued to stare at one another for several long seconds before Naruto sighed quietly. A hint of sadness appeared in his eyes before he slowly returned his gaze to Kaguya. Are you sure? I can help you, he offered quietly. Kaguya's chest clenched tightly before she shook her head. You must seal me away. Naruto was silent for a moment before speaking once more, his tone being layered in sadness. If that's what you want. Sure, he finished lamely. Sasuke glanced at his blonde friend quietly before directing his attention to the woman. This was a unique situation. These two were interacting as if they had known each all their life. Sasuke would have questioned how that was possible, but he knew, on some level at least, that Naruto was capable of connecting with people near instantaneously. Kaguya was clearly no different, but it seemed far more intimate. Naruto sighed quietly before glancing towards Sasuke and nudging his head forward. The blonde teen said nothing else and slowly made his way towards Kaguya's position with Sasuke following a step behind. The woman continued to stare at the actions she committed and sported a disappointed expression. She had let her emotions dictate her reasons and justify her beliefs. Why? Because she was hurt. She shook her head with a quiet scoff. How could she have been so blind? She always wanted the world to be a better place. Enslaving humanity, taking their chakra away, and subjugating their will while simultaneously draining them of their life force was clearly not the answer. Why did she let this power go to her head? Why? Throwing a tantrum because of the pain that she experienced from Tenji's supposed betrayal. Was it even a real betrayal? Not really. Being of clear mind now, Tenji had every right to react the way he did. She was a bigger threat to humanity as a whole than the land of that could have ever been. Just look at the outcome. Humanity was being enslaved once again, and the only people able to match her were two teens that held the power of her beloved son. She deserved whatever fate the gods held for her, and she would accept it with open arms. Kaguya felt two hands make contact with her back and did not react, just staring blankly out into the vast terrain of rock. Naruto began quietly. Can I ever speak to you again? Sasuke believed that was an odd question to ask. His unique eyes trailed towards his best friend and he just stared at the teen with a calculating gaze. Kaguya was silent for a moment before replying quietly. You are aware of the others. She paused for a moment before turning her head to stare at Naruto. Only then are you allowed to unseal me. Sasuke's eyes narrowed at the answer, and before he could voice his concern he was beaten by Naruto. We'll be ready. He nodded with a determined gaze and raised his other hand towards his chest with his thumb pointing inwards. I promise. Kaguya said nothing for several moments before nodding her head silently. Goodbye, Naruto. The teen swallowed quietly as the woman finally addressed him by his name. His eyes narrowed sadly as they trailed southward. Goodbye, Kaguya. Naruto flared his chakra with Sasuke following shortly after. The symbols on their hands shone brightly as they both spoke. Rakudo, Chibaku Tensai. The earth began to shake and tremble shortly after the teen spoke. Kaguya's body slowly rose into the sky as Naruto watched her ascend with saddened eyes. She became a mere speck in the sky before several thousand pieces of earth rocketed towards her position. The giant boulders of rock continued to crash into her, trapping her in an inescapable prison. For several long minutes the process continued. Rock after rock after rock was jettisoned towards the woman, forming what was no doubt the biggest Chibaku Tensai besides the moon itself. After a full 10 minutes of non-stop trembling did the jutsu finally cease. The earth stopped trembling and the world calmed down as the giant satellite of rock hovered unperturbed in the sky. Naruto stared at the massive sphere of rock with a small frown before sighing quietly and shaking his head. Who would have thought that this would have been the outcome of the war? He had changed a goddess. He should be happy. But he wasn't. And he didn't really know why. He was happy that he had stopped her and practically saved the world, but he was feeling kind of empty. You okay, kid? Naruto blinked at the voice of Kurama, who had been surprisingly silent the entire time. He was embarrassed to admit that he almost forgot about his new friend. Naruto sighed quietly before speaking aloud to his Biju. Yeah, I'm okay. I think. Kurama did not respond and did not bother correcting the boy's obvious lie. Kurama and Naruto were now synced on a level that only Biju and Jinchuriki could possibly share. He wasn't okay. Naruto inhaled deeply before turning towards his best friend, who was staring at him with furrowed eyebrows. Naruto blinked at the look before speaking. What? He asked quietly. Sasuke was silent for a few moments before ultimately shaking his head and turning towards the satellite of rock that held Kaguya. Nothing, he answered shortly. Come on, let's release the jutsu. He gestured with his hand before holding up his left hand and waiting for Naruto to form the other half of the hand seal. Naruto nodded his head before walking towards his best friend and placing his right hand against Sasuke's left hand. The two teens formed the rat hand seal before pulsing their chakra. The giant tree that held the cocoons of mankind writhed for a moment before it began to slowly shrivel. The world grew brighter and a massive explosion of chakra exploded and began to spread across the entire world. Slowly but ever so surely did mankind begin to leave their genjutsu paradise. The thousands upon thousands of cocoons shriveled up as man, woman, child, etc. broke free of their confines. Naruto stared down the valley of his perch and spotted all of his friends and close ones smiling and cheering. It brought a small smile to his face, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. While certainly happy that he had saved the world and freed all of his friends, he still felt like he was missing something. His cerulean orb slowly rose to the massive construct of rock as he stared at Kaguya's prison. His small smile disappeared as both of his hands found purchase in his pockets. Several of his fellow shinobi jumped up to the perch that he and Sasuke stood on, but he ignored their presence and continued to stare at the woman's prison. Why do I miss you so much? Sasuke interacted with his friends, but never took his eyes off Naruto. His best friend had yet to acknowledge his friends and just continued to stare at the earth that rested in the sky. A small frown formed on Sasuke's face at the lack of interaction that Naruto was doing despite being surrounded by his fellow shinobi and friends. His smile was fake. His greetings were hollow. It wasn't right. The ebony-haired teen slowly glanced towards the Chibaku Tensei before returning to the blonde teen. Perhaps it was just the shock of everything that had happened in such a short amount of time. Naruto would be just fine. At least that's what Sasuke told himself. He wouldn't realize how wrong he was in the future. 3 years later. Hey, Auntie Tsunade. A voice softly spoke out into an empty clearing. The sound of glass bottles clinking together was heard, followed shortly afterwards by the sound of a cork being unscrewed. I got your favorite. Gamabunta decided not to be stingy. Hehe. A much more mature-looking Naruto slowly sat onto the grassy terrain in front of a large grave made of stone. Etched into the rock was a memorial of Tsunade's face. Several flowers, vases, and other tributes rested against her grave as Naruto pulled out 2 glass bottles. He arranged the bottles side by side before pouring Tsunade's favorite sake into the glasses. He sported a gentle expression on his matured face as he quietly did his task. His hair was a couple inches shorter but still retained the spiky features that he was so well known for. His attire changed slightly as he wore a black jacket with the sleeves cuffed at his forearms. He wore a pair of burnt orange pants that were tucked into a pair of black open-toed sandals. Kakashi-sensei says I'll be able to take over the mantle in a couple of years. He rose the glass off the ground before softly clinking it against the other glass. It's pretty surreal, I guess. The 20-year-old man chuckled quietly as he stared at the memorial of his surrogate mother. He was silent for a few moments before averting his gaze from her grave and rubbing his neck anxiously with his free hand. I miss you a lot. You were always there for me. His eyes glistened slightly as he continued after a moment of hesitation. It's hard, Auntie Tsunade. Very hard. I'm a jonin now. His smile shifted into a grin which proved to be a depressing sight due to the tears that were slowly trailing down his cheeks. Naruto cleared his throat as he released a choked sob. I tried the dating scene. Well, it didn't lead anywhere. His cerulean orbs fell to the ground as he swirled his cup of sake. All I think about is her. Naruto did not elaborate, nor did he continue, choosing to remain silent. Several minutes passed by as a gentle breeze swept through the clearing. After Naruto collected himself, he sipped on his glass of sake before speaking once more. I never did get to tell you how much I loved you. You were like a mother to me. He trailed off quietly and remained silent for a few minutes. Thank you, Auntie Tsunade. I love you. He finished with a soft smile as he downed the rest of his sake. Naruto placed his glass of sake on the ground as his eyes trailed towards the large satellite of rock that was a few hundred miles away from Konoha. It was ever present, never being touched and or bothered. He had made sure of that. He had clones stationed around the large prison day in and day out to make sure that it wasn't tampered or bothered with. It was a painful reminder. He had thought of Kaguya every night that he fell asleep. There wasn't a day that went by where he didn't think about the woman. He had thought it was a phase at first. After all, he connected with a lot of people. Neji, Gaara, Tsunade, Nagato, Obito, Sasuke. But with Kaguya, it was like an obsession. His heart felt empty. It had gotten so bad that he had sought out Kakashi for help. He had questioned his former sensei about the feeling while withholding the information ascertaining to Kaguya herself. Kakashi had teased him about it first, questioning if what he was feeling was about a woman. When Naruto had confirmed, Kakashi had gotten quiet. A few moments of silence and the man had confirmed what Naruto had been putting off. Sounds like you're in love, Naruto. It didn't really surprise Naruto because deep down he had assumed this to be the case, but he had just chosen to ignore it and push it to the back of his mind. In love with Kaguya Otsutsuki. The same woman who had given birth to the Rakudo Sennin and the very same woman that had almost enslaved humanity twice. It was crazy. He knew Kaguya for less than 5 hours and was absolutely in love with her. Naruto shook his head quietly as he rubbed his face. He had seen her entire life play out and all of the associated emotions that followed. He knew everything about her. How was he not supposed to fall for her? Yes, her actions and the sins she committed were atrocious, but she had changed. Was it weird? Probably. In love with a goddess. Kami. What would his mom think? Actually, she'd probably be happy that he finally found someone and would possibly jump for joy that he loved the strongest woman in the elemental nations. Shaking his head of those thoughts, Naruto slowly rose to his feet while placing his hands in his pockets. He slowly leaned his body over before placing a gentle kiss on the stone memorial of Tsunade, right on her forehead. Naruto returned to his full height before sensing someone behind him. He furrowed his eyebrows in confusion before spotting a pale-skinned man. A pale-skinned man that shared a heavy resemblance to the Otsutsukis. His eyes narrowed significantly as he began to idly draw in nature chakra. If this Otsutsuki wanted a fight, then Naruto would give him one. What's your name? Naruto questioned quietly as his pupils shifted into their trademark toad design. The pale-skinned man was silent for several moments before a small smile appeared on his face. His eyes did not open and Naruto suspected that he lacked actual pupils. My name is Tonari Otsutsuki. I wanted to meet the hero of the Fourth Shinobi War, for myself. You do not disappoint, he replied in a calm manner. Tonari Otsutsuki. That wasn't one of the names that he learned from Kaguya's memories. Naruto directed the entirety of his chakra on the man and would have scoffed if he was Sasuke. This guy wasn't anywhere near his level if he was cringing just from the weight of his base chakra. He'd crush him without having to even access Kurama's power. With that being the case, why was he here? Any particular reason you're here, Tonari Otsutsuki? Naruto questioned with a raised eyebrow. You wouldn't be able to touch me, in case you were wondering. I suggest you return to where you came from. My best friend isn't as understanding. Tonari's eyebrows furrowed in confusion at the statement before feeling the cold steel of a blade on his throat. His body tensed up as his head slowly turned to face behind him. What's an Otsutsuki doing here? The newcomer questioned in a hardened tone. His mismatched orbs gazing directly at Tonari with a blank expression. A violet Rinnegan that had several Tomo in his left orb and a Magnikyo Sharingan in the right. Beats me, Sasuke. Naruto answered lazily. He didn't attack me so. He trailed off while gesturing with his hand for the pale-skinned man to speak. Sasuke tilted the blade closer to Tonari's throat before speaking, not allowing Tonari to speak. It doesn't mean he won't cause trouble. He isn't a match for the both of us. The blonde Jinchuriki shrugged his shoulders before turning away from his best friend and walking away. Let me know what you find. I'm going to visit her. Naruto waved behind his back before disappearing in a yellow flash, leaving his best friend with the unknown Otsutsuki. Naruto appeared in a yellow flash directly atop Kaguya's prison. He glanced around his surroundings before shrugging his shoulders and sitting down on the large formation of rock. And he just sat, and sat, and sat, for hours and hours. When he wasn't doing missions or training to get even stronger, he was here. Sitting atop Kaguya's prison. Waiting. For what? He wasn't entirely sure. Well, that was a lie. He knew exactly why. If the Otsutsuki that was chasing Kaguya found this planet, then Naruto wanted to be ready to release her at a moment's notice. These beings were incredibly powerful, and while Sasuke and he were incredibly powerful, they were not Otsutsuki. It's not to say that they didn't train and get stronger, but it would always pale in comparison to the natural power that the Otsutsuki bloodline harbored. Naruto was far more powerful now than when he was 17, exponentially so. But that didn't mean he should get complacent. That Momoshiki guy scared Kaguya. Granted, that had been before she ate the Shinju fruit, but still. Never hurts to prepare just in case. All three of those Otsutsuki could potentially attack at the same time. While it was a harrowing thought, he was confident that with Sasuke and Kaguya at his side that they'd be fine. "How are you, Kaguya?" Naruto asked quietly. He was silent for several minutes before speaking once again. "I visited Auntie Tsunade today. Shared some sake with her." He sighed heavily before laying down on the rock with his hands crossed behind his head. "I still hate the taste. I don't get how people can drink the stuff. Tastes awful." Naruto was silent for another few minutes before closing his eyes with a smile. "My birthday is coming up soon and ehhh. Not really feeling it. The guys wanna take me out drinking but I don't know. I'm just not an alcohol guy. All of it tastes gross but meh. They wanna go out and I feel obligated to go since I'm barely in the village nowadays, what with all the training, missions and peace discussions between the nations." Several hours went by as Naruto continued to have a one-sided conversation with Kaguya. The sun began to slowly descend as the moon was on the cusp of rising. Naruto slowly peeked an eye open and noticed Sasuke standing several feet away from him, staring at the setting sun. Sasuke wore a piece of black cloth that wrapped around his forehead, holding his hair in place. One of his bangs drooped down his face, covering his Rinnegan and hiding it. He wore a dirty, sandy poncho over his main attire and wore dark gray pants with blank open-toed sandals. His kusanagi was hidden underneath the poncho and rested in the man's right hand. "So, what did y'all learn?" Naruto asked with a curious eyebrow. Sasuke was silent for a moment before shaking his head in slight annoyance. "He has an obsession with Hinata." Sasuke glanced towards Naruto to see if he'd react. As expected, nothing. Platonic at best. "Oh," the blonde replied with feigning interest. His eyes slowly shut before he spoke once more in that same bland tone. "What did ya do to him?" The sound of dripping liquid was the only sound that was heard between the two brothers. Naruto made a low humming noise as he responded in a chastising tone. "Sakura's gonna be mad you're spilling blood again." Sasuke didn't bother responding to the boy's statement. Toneri would have been a problem and problems like that needed to be dealt with swiftly. "Did he suffer?" Naruto asked curiously while peeking an eye open curiously. The last Uchiha glanced at his best friend before responding in a placid tone. "That would require me caring enough to do so. Could have just said, 'No, ya bastard.'" Naruto jibbed back amusingly. Sasuke sported a small smirk on his face as he responded, changing the subject. "Still here, The blonde Jinchuriki sighed quietly before replying. "Just ask what you wanna ask. You love her, don't you?" There was silence for several minutes. "Yes, I do," Naruto responded quietly. "Why are you asking?" The last Uchiha was quiet for a scant few moments before just nodding his head and disappearing, not uttering a single word. Naruto's face scrunched up in annoyance before he proceeded to roll his eyes. "Stupid bastard." 12 years later. Sarada Uchiha vs Shikadai Nara. A much older-looking Naruto slowly opened his eyes before trailing them towards the large arena below him. He was resting his cheek on his clenched fist, not really paying attention to the happenings of the Chunin exams. As bad as that sounded, he took his job as the 7th Hokage serious, but sometimes ya just get lazy. "Nay, Hokage dono." The voice of the 4th Tsuchikage Kuritsuchi rang out in amusement. "Bored already, Naruto slowly glanced to his 4 fellow Kages who were staring at him with raised eyebrows. Ignoring each of their amused gazes, he replied with a small smirk. "Little bit, yeah. Can you blame me though?" Naruto rubbed his eyes before shaking his head and focusing on the fight that was currently happening. The other Kage idly chatted with another, praising the 2 Konoha genins for their intellect and ingenuity. Naruto stared at Sarada with an appraising gaze as he watched her footwork. She moved just like Sasuke did at their age but fought the ferocity and passion of her mother. She was certainly Sasuke and Sakura's daughter. Shikadai was more or less Shikamaru with a hint of Temari. He was far more motivated, so that was a good sign. Unlike Shikamaru, Shikadai was willing to go out and actively train without the ever-looming threat of Temari's battle fan. Naruto continued to watch the 2 genins fight before feeling a prick at the back of his neck. His eyebrows furrowed for a moment as his gaze shifted towards Sasuke, who was sitting on top of one of the roofs in the stadium. The 2 men stared into each other's eyes for a single moment before flaring their chakra. Not a moment later did the stadium become covered in Sasuke and Naruto's chakra. Every person in the village stopped what they were doing as the two strongest men the elemental nations exerted their will upon the world. Dark purple chakra exploded in the sky, meshing together with the bright orange chakra that covered the entire village. The entire world seemed to quake underneath the pressure of Sasuke and Naruto's chakra presence as another powerful presence appeared, clashing with Naruto and Sasuke's chakra. Well, look what we have here. Naruto's unique pupils slowly traveled into the sky, spotting a particularly short pale-skinned man. He sported two antelope-like horns atop his crown and his power was relatively impressive. Naruto appeared beside Sarada and Shikadai with his hands resting atop their shoulders. Sasuke appeared a moment later beside his brother as he too stared up at the diminutive Otsutsuki. Kyuubi Jinchuriki. The short man spoke aloud with a sick smile. I will be taking that chakra inside you. Naruto stared at the man for a brief moment before another Otsutsuki appeared beside the shorter one. This man was giant in comparison to his ally and held a decent amount of power. Not enough to really challenge he or Sasuke. The only person that could be a threat was the short Otsutsuki member. You are that strong all things considered. Naruto taunted calmly. He immediately noticed the shorter man's irritated visage. You don't even compare to Kaguya. The change in the man's demeanor was noticed by all. His visage shifted from irritated to angry almost instantaneously. His chakra exploded outwards and an amused expression formed on Naruto's face. This man wasn't all that powerful. Naruto could take him by himself. Naruto became shrouded in the energy of Kurama. His Haori jacket extended to the back of his knees and flickered at the tip like ethereal flames. Naruto flared his chakra once more and his orange chakra cloak shined brightly. 7 Gudodama appeared behind his back with two small horns jutting out from his crown. Black Magatama markings spread out across his body in a unique fashion. I'd say you're Momoshiki judging by the reaction to Kaguya's name. I've got a score to settle with you, midget. Naruto's taunt caused Momoshiki to grit his teeth in pure rage. You dare mock me, you little monkey. I'll show you. The diminutive man was cut off from speaking as Naruto appeared directly in front of the man with his hand wrapped around the man's face. A nanosecond passed by before Naruto and Momoshiki disappeared in a yellow flash. Naruto trusted that Sasuke could easily deal with the fat Otsutsuki. He wanted to crush Momoshiki beneath his boot. The two powerful men appeared in the air several hundred miles away from Konoha. Naruto reared his arm back before launching Momoshiki into the earth. The short man impacted the ground almost instantaneously as a mountain of earth exploded from the action. Naruto remained floating in the air with his hands in his pockets. He was staring down at the ruined earth with a blank expression before turning his head slightly to the right. Behind him was the massive prison of Kaguya, looming ominously. A small smirk formed on Naruto's face as he spoke to the satellite of Earth. Can you sense him, Kaguya-chan? He felt the lightest pulse of chakra from within the sphere and a genuine smile formed on his face. Do you want to be released? He asked rhetorically, already knowing the answer. Another pulse, this time far stronger than the previous. So much so that the prison almost seemed to quake and tremble. A Gudodama morphed into a staff before floating towards Naruto's hand. The blonde man twirled the black staff before resting it against his shoulder. I'll release you shortly, Kaguya-chan. I want to break him. His eyes bled red for a moment before returning to their previous bright orange. A beam of pure red chakra zipped out of the dust below Naruto, heading straight towards his head. Naruto glanced towards the beam before raising his hand and casually slapping the beam of energy away from his body and away from Kaguya's prison. The beam of energy struck the ground almost a second later and a ginormous explosion rocked the earth. The land quaked and shifted for several seconds due to the powerful attack. Naruto lazily scratched his chin before pointing his staff towards Momoshiki's position. You're not very strong. I hope you get more powerful, otherwise this'll just be a waste of my time. The shorter Otsutsuki member appeared directly in Naruto's with a red orb of chakra that rivaled one of Naruto's Udama Rasengan. I'll crush you. The short Otsutsuki screamed out harshly. Naruto scoffed quietly before disappearing in a yellow flash, causing Momoshiki's eyes to actually widen. Pain crashed into Momoshiki as Naruto's golden-clad boot struck against his jaw. Blood spewed out from his mouth, and due to the lapse of concentration his orb of chakra destabilized. Before the orb could implode, pain erupted from the top of Momoshiki's head. Naruto's fist struck directly on the crown of the man's head, sending him rocketing back into the hole that Naruto had sent him into during their first bout. Momoshiki's body impacted into the earth, and before he could react, Naruto appeared direct above him with a lava-infused Rasengan spiraling in his left hand. Momoshiki's eyes widened and pain filled his body as the superheated Rasengan slammed into his abdomen. The lava-infused Rasengan grinded and seared his flesh before Naruto forced the jutsu to explode. A tremendous geyser of lava erupted into the heavens, followed shortly afterwards by a large shockwave. A scream of pain followed shortly after the large explosion of lava. Naruto stood over Momoshiki, who had several Gudodama stabbed through his appendages. Naruto was slightly surprised to see the man be unaffected by the Gudodama's ability to atomize whatever it touches. Interesting. Not like it mattered though. The man would be dead pretty soon. Naruto twirled one of his remaining Gudodama before placing it directly on Momoshiki's forehead. I really should just kill you now. But I promised Kaguya-chan I'd release her to finish you off. Anything you wanna say before you die? The short Otsutsuki grinned through bloody teeth before spitting a flob of substance at Naruto's "You mongrel." Naruto wiped the crimson liquid off of his face with a lazy swipe before slowly shaking his head. He raised his golden-clad sandal before stomping directly onto the man's lower jaw. Naruto sighed quietly before glancing to his right and spotting Sasuke, who was shouldering the fat Otsutsuki. Naruto didn't sense the man's life force and could only assume that he had killed him. That didn't take long, Naruto observed quietly with a raised brow. Sasuke didn't respond to the statement and proceeded to stare down at the diminutive Otsutsuki member. He isn't dead. Sasuke's placid statement caused a small smirk to form on Naruto's face. No, he isn't. Sasuke did not fall for the bait as he dropped the large Otsutsuki member on the ground. Why? He asked simply. Naruto's response was to hold up his right hand, signaling for Sasuke to finish the unfinished hand seal that he was making. There was a brief moment of silence that passes through the clearing before Sasuke turned his head towards Kaguya's prison. His mismatched orbs stared at the satellite of rock before he sighed quietly. It's been 15 years, Naruto. The blonde man ignored the statement and just continued to hold his right hand out. I don't know why I even bother. The ebony-haired man shook his head in annoyance before placing his left hand against Naruto's right hand, finishing the seal required for releasing Kaguya. The two men flared their chakra for a moment, and shortly after the world began to shake. The giant satellite of rock began to slowly break apart, sending mountain-sized boulders down towards the earth. Several minutes passed by as both men stared at the construct of chakra that was slowly withering away. Naruto stood still with bated breath as he felt the presence of Kaguya wash over the elemental nations. Her chakra wrapped itself around him, cocooning and entangling him. His heartbeat began to quicken as the final pieces of rubble began to slowly fall away from Kaguya. His entire focus was centered on the beautiful woman who was floating motionlessly in the air. Several seconds went by in silence before the woman's eyes slowly opened. Her chakra flared for a brief moment before her head tilted downward. Her snowy white eyes focused on Momoshiki's form for all but a second before instantly shifting towards Naruto and staring directly into his unique eyes. The two powerful individuals continued their little stare-off for a full minute before Kaguya abruptly moved, and this time, Naruto was able to follow her without trouble. She appeared directly in front of him before slowly craning her head to stare into his eyes. He had gotten immensely taller these last few years. Where he once stood an inch or two above her, he now stood almost 2 heads taller than her, towering over her. His chakra. His chakra. It hadn't changed at all. Comforting. Warm. Kind. The goddess took a step closer to the man as her head tilted curiously. You have changed. A lot. Naruto stared into her beautiful white orbs for a moment before offering her a gentle smile. You have not. Still as beautiful as I remember. Kaguya blinked at the compliment, not truly knowing how to reply. She enjoyed it immensely despite not physically showing a reaction to it. The man was aware of her emotions anyway, so it didn't matter if she reacted to begin with. I heard you. She started softly. Every day that you visited. Asking me mundane questions or just talking to fill the silence? Your visits. I appreciated them. Naruto's cheeks pulled back as he grinned softly with a gentle look in his eyes. I thought about you. Every single day. I don't think there was a day that went by where I didn't. Kaguya's head inclined slightly at the statement. You expressed this sentiment many a times during your frequent visits. A small dash of red actually painted the whiskered man's cheeks that was thankfully hidden by his Kurama cloak. Naruto chuckled nervously while rubbing the back of his head. Why yeah, he coughed awkwardly as his eyes strayed towards Sasuke, who sported an amused smirk. Anyway, I have a gift. He slowly flourished with his left hand and came to stand by Kaguya's side. He placed his left hand on her lower back as he gestured towards the disabled Otsutsuki laying on the ground, pinned by Naruto's Gudodamas. I assume that this little cretin is Momoshiki, no? He asked rhetorically. Kaguya did not verbally respond as her gaze shifted to the tint Otsutsuki member currently splayed out on the ground. Her eyes narrowed significantly as she continued to stare the man who had hunted her since she was but a babe. She used to be terrified of this little vermin. Scared that he would devour her. Scared that he would kill her just like her beloved little sister. But now that she was getting a good look at him and sensing the power he held. He was weak, frail, pathetic. Kaguya slowly raised her hand with her index finger extended towards the tiny man. Her Byakugan activated as she glared at Momoshiki with hate. I will see you in hell, cousin. She whispered venomously. A bone shard proceeded to fly out the tip of her finger before impaling the man directly in his forehead. His eyes widened exponentially before his body started to turn to ash. It only took 5 seconds for the man to be completely erased from existence. An impressive and slightly terrifying feat. Naruto stared at the remains of Momoshiki before glancing towards Sasuke and raising an eyebrow. And you say you survived against that? Sasuke just rolled his eyes before glancing towards the other deceased Otsutsuki that was laying on the ground. Black flames immediately covered the man's body as Sasuke turned towards Naruto. The two brothers shared a silent conversation before Sasuke disappeared in a burst of speed, leaving the two alone. Naruto was silent for a few moments before turning towards the pale-skinned goddess and blinking at the look that she was currently giving him. Her white orbs peered directly at him and he met her gaze with little trouble. His cerulean orbs traveled along her unique and delicate features for several moments before he took a step closer. Kaguya showed no objection to the movement and continued to remain silent, staring into his eyes. The blonde man took another step closer to the woman who still did not object to his advance. Naruto licked his lips for a moment before closing the distance between them in a single stride. Kaguya's head craned upwards as the blonde man stood but a single inch away from her. Her pale orbs roamed across his face, studying every inch that could see and memorizing every little detail. Chiseled chin, thin eyebrows, sharp eyes. An attractive man he was. Naruto started quietly, his usual confident and bold personality evading him. Damn, this is hard. He released a shaky sigh before shaking his head. He was about to start again before being stopped as Kaguya's finger found purchase atop his lips. The blonde man stared at the woman with furrowed eyebrows. You need not say it. I am already aware, Naruto. Her tone was soft and gentle as her finger lightly trailed away from his mouth and onto his chiseled chin. Her dainty fingers gently grasped his chin and he slowly leaned into the touch. I am not sure if I can say the same, but She faltered for a moment before ultimately sighing and placing her hand on the back of his head. She ran her fingers through his spiky hair as she stared into his eyes. I am willing to try. She finished softly. Naruto's arms slowly encircled the woman who showed no signs of resisting. His larger stature towering over her and dwarfing her. His fingers idly swept through her long tresses of snowy white hair as he inhaled her scent. He inhaled heavily before exhaling quietly and staring into the woman's beautiful orbs. His eyes widened in surprise as the woman pulled his face towards his own. Their lips met a second later as Naruto stood completely still, not truly expecting the woman to do what she did. After a short awkward moment, his eyes slowly closed and his tense shoulders uncoiled slowly. His lips intertwined with the shorter woman's own and he succumbed to the touch of the goddess. Delicate, soft. Before he realized it, he was pulling the woman flush against his body. The goddess did not resist his action and seemed almost pleased to an extent. Her claw-like nails raked through his hair, sending chills down his spine. Kaguya released a tiny moan as she slipped her tongue into Naruto's mouth. Her body shook with pleasure as the taller man reciprocated her action. A heavy blush formed on the woman's face as she released another tiny mewl of pleasure. This was getting a bit overwhelming. Kaguya pulled away with a breathy exhale as her chest rose and fell heavily. Her cheeks were dusted red as she stared into the man's cerulean orbs. She enjoyed that very much. Naruto released a heavy exhale as he stared into the woman's eyes. He had wanted to do this for the last 15 years. He wasn't embarrassed to admit that he had even dreamt of this happening, but this was better than of those dreams. He might be addicted to the touch of a goddess. And, so like I was originally gonna end it with a but I got lazy, sue me. Maybe I'll just upload a second chapter and it'll be the meh, whatever. Hope you enjoyed. Or didn't. Don't give a suck my dick, idiots. See ya in the next update. Chapter 2. I love you. And the mad lad back at it again. Here's that second chapter with it. Suck my dick. Join the bloody damn Discord server. Invite code is STPC 5 volts. Disclaimer. Juice WRLD, all girls are the same. What of this? Your kind call this delicacy, ice cream. Naruto's azure orbs focused on the pale-skinned goddess that sat in front of him. A small smile formed on his face as the woman poked the frozen treat with curious, yet suspicious eyes. Yes, Kaguya-chan. He slowly placed his own bowl of ice cream on the table before gesturing towards the woman. Here, let me. Kaguya slowly blinked as the blonde man picked her bowl up. She watched with narrowed eyes as the man scooped up some of the frozen treat before holding it out towards her. Silence. What is it that you are doing? Kaguya didn't understand why she was feeling so embarrassed. I am feeding you, he replied simply while jostling his hand slightly. Open your mouth, please, he requested with a tiny smile. The woman did not move for several long seconds as her blank gaze bore into Naruto's. I am not a child. Naruto slowly shook his head while still holding the spoon out towards her. Of course not, but I want to feed you. Will you let me? He questioned with a tilt of the head. Kaguya's eyes left her lover, before trailing around the establishment that she and Naruto were eating at, taking note of the many customers who were currently watching their little interaction. It was uncomfortable. Come on, Haim. Naruto spoke softly. Don't mind them. Focus on me. Look at me. Her pale eyes shifted from his face into the delicacy resting atop the spoon several times before she slowly and hesitantly opened her mouth. She watched the man's eyes crinkle from the soft smile that was now adorned on his handsome face. She felt heat slowly spread across her face as the spoon moved closer to her orifice. Naruto slowly placed the spoon inside Kaguya's mouth and grinned at her embarrassed expression. A few seconds went by before he slowly pulled the spoon out of her mouth. It was spotless. Kaguya's embarrassed expression tapered off as she stared at her bowl of ice cream. Give me more, she demanded. Naruto hid his chuckle with a minor cough before spooning more of the frozen treat onto the utensil and feeding it to Kaguya. Spoonful after spoonful was downed by the pale-skinned goddess who showed little sign of stopping. The quiet clinking of the spoon making contact with the glass bowl filled the silence between the two lovers. Naruto and Kaguya's eyes simultaneously traveled towards the empty bowl. There was a brief lull of silence before Kaguya grasped Naruto's hand while guiding it towards his own bowl. She proceeded to push down on his hand, signaling for him to scoop up his own ice cream and feed it to her. Which he did after a brief moment of laughter. Naruto continued to feed the mother of chakra with an easy smile on his face. He didn't mind it all that much. Ice cream wasn't really the sweet treat that he preferred, but he didn't mind it. But it seemed like it was Kaguya's favorite. She was practically making him shovel it down her throat. The woman cleaned his bowl in a fraction of the time she finished her own and proceeded to stare into his eyes with a small frown. Can I have more? Well, how could he say no to her? She was giving him the puppy dog eyes. And so, Naruto continued to feed the goddess ice cream. They went through every single flavor in the shop and Naruto took note that her favorite was chocolate pecan. He would have pegged her as a vanilla lover, to be honest. Kaguya possessed a pleased smile on her beautiful face as she rested against the mahogany chair she sat in. Several dozen empty bowls were stacked in front of her in a neat and orderly array. Kaguya silently eyed the waitress who was nervously collecting the empty bowls in front of her. She could sense the woman's fear and apprehension at being in such close proximity. It was disheartening. I hope you enjoyed the treats. The waitress bowed incredibly low, causing the glass bowls that sat on the metal tray to clank loudly against one another. Kaguya could practically taste the young woman's fear. It was basically palpable. Before the horned goddess could reply to the statement, the waitress swiftly retreated behind the sanctity of the kitchen to clean the used dishes. Kaguya stared at the woman's retreating form the entire time until losing sight of her behind the double doors that led into the kitchen. Her face was blank, but her eyes. Disappointment, sadness, regret. Hey, she felt the warm and gentle hand of her lover caress her own hands as he continued to speak. Just give it time, he reassured her softly. She didn't bother responding to his statement, choosing to stare at his hands that were gently stroking her own. She wanted to believe him, but Naruto had revealed exactly who she was a little over a month ago. A bold thing to do, considering she was the entire reason that the Fourth Shinobi War even existed. It had been an incredibly arduous time. Not just for her but for Naruto as well. Many people in the elemental nations had genuinely questioned his sanity about the decision, and she did not truly blame them. Sasuke's intervention had put an immediate stop to that. As cold and off-putting as the man tended to be, he was Naruto's brother in all but blood. He had made sure to remind the elemental nation of every single deed that Naruto had committed and the actions he had selflessly done to pave the road for future peace. Only those who were truly close to Naruto had been accepting of his relationship with her. The others had wisely chose to keep their opinions to themselves. It would do the world no good if 2 out of the 3 strongest beings in the elemental nations were angered. Politics had been the major headache for her lover, and she had apologized on multiple occasions for it. The ethicality of her actions, her existence in the first place, their relationship, etc. Naruto weathered each and every one of the grueling conversations with an easy smile. Simply stating that she was worth the effort and headaches. It meant so much to her, but at the same time, she was entirely responsible for them. Are those horns on your head? Kaguya's attention was pulled from her thoughts as she slowly glanced to her left. She spotted a young girl, who couldn't be older than 6, staring at her with wide eyes. She possessed navy blue hair and sported a similar pair of white eyes, alluding to the fact that the little girl was of Hyuga descent. She had a pair of red markings that resembled a triangle on both of her cheeks and sported incredibly sharp canines. The little Inuzuka Hyuga wore a fluffy jacket that had wolf's fur lining the hood and an all-black skirt. The entire establishment went completely still and quiet at the little girl's outburst. Kaguya's blank eyes focused on the little girl as she stared into her eyes. Several long seconds passed before Kaguya responded. Yes, these are indeed horns. She answered simply. The little girl bounced excitedly as she moved closer to the table that Kaguya and Naruto sat at. Her hands grasped the table as she bounced up and down. Are they real? She questioned with an overly large smile. Kaguya once again replied in that same monotonous tone. Yes. The hyperactive girl seemed to get even more excited. Ooh, can I touch them? She rose a hand towards Kaguya's head despite being too short to even touch the woman's shoulders. Kaguya seemed taken aback by the question, and action is evident by her furrowed brows and tilted head. She blinked several times as the little girl desperately tried to grasp Kaguya's horns. Himawari-chan. The little girl stopped what she was doing before glancing towards the man that had called her name. Uncle Naru. She yelled happily while running towards him and jumping at him. The Nanadime Hokage caught the speeding rocket known as Himawari while laughing softly. Where are your parents? He asked her once she settled down in his lap. Himawari grinned from her position as she stared at Kaguya while replying. Mommy was too slow. I wanted ice cream, but she was being a slowpoke. She sported an adorable pout after her words. Naruto patted the girl's head as he replied. I understand, but you can't run off like that. You'll scare your mother if you keep doing it. Do you like making her worried? The little girl's demeanor shifted immediately as she replied in a quiet tone. No. Naruto nodded his head while ruffling her hair. Then why do you run off, he asked in a slightly chastising tone. Himawari's head sank low and she adorned a tiny grimace on her face while replying quietly. No. Naruto sighed in faux disappointment before replying. Looks like I'm going to have to tell your mother, Himawari. A sly smirk formed on his face as the girl turned around with a shocked expression despite the fact that her mother would already know about her running off. Little kids were so gullible. You can't. I'll get in trouble. And then mommy won't let me get ice cream anymore. Naruto glanced towards his lover for a moment before placing his index finger on his chin and humming exaggeratedly. I don't know. He tapped his chin several times before continuing. Maybe if you ask Kaguya-chan nicely, she can help you. Kaguya blinked slowly as the little girl turned towards her with a pointed gaze. She proceeded to clasp her hands together in a rather adorable gesture while bowing her head. Please help me, princess. I want to have ice cream. The horned goddess was silent for a scant moment before meeting her lover's gaze. Adorned upon his face was that same gentle smile he always had when talking to her. Kaguya averted her gaze with a light blush while responding to Himawari. It would be my pleasure. Himawari cheered loudly from her seated position before hopping out of Naruto's lap and racing towards Kaguya. Before she could reach the woman, a voice resounded out from the front of the store. Himawari-chan, what did I say about running? You scared me half to death. 3 pairs of eyes immediately turned towards the individual that had spoken. A rather buxom woman with the distinct traits of being of Hyuga descent began to slowly make her way towards them. Her navy blue hair fell to her lower back and the casual sweater she wore did little to hide her figure. The horned goddess glanced down towards her wardrobe for a mere moment as a minute frown appeared on her face. Was her kimono too boring? Perhaps a change would do her good. I'm so sorry. The brunette apologized with a minor amount of embarrassment. Himawari loves ice cream. Naruto donned a small smile while waving away her apology. It's fine, Hinata. She reminds me of myself at that age. He chuckled lowly while glancing towards Kaguya, who was subtly studying Hinata's outfit. Naruto didn't comment on his lover's interested gaze and just smiled. How are you and Kiba doing? He asked with a small gesture of his hand. The now named Hinata gave a small smile as Himawari grasped her hand while swinging her arms back and forth. We've been doing good. Her eyes trailed towards Kaguya for a moment before returning to Naruto's cerulean orbs. Are Kaguya and yourself doing well? No problems, I'd hope. A concerned frown tugged at her features after her question. Kaguya noted that the woman seemed genuine about the question, which didn't really surprise her either. This woman had been incredibly head over heels for Naruto when they were younger. After his brief stint in the dating scene and his relatively short time with said woman, he had decided that it wasn't for him. They had been involved for a few months before ending the relationship and staying as friends. The usual backhanded compliment and snide remarks here and there. Naruto glanced towards his lover, who was now staring at the table with a narrowed gaze. But other than that, perfect. Hinata glanced towards the quiet goddess with a small frown before speaking. Are you well, Kaguya-sama? The pale-skinned woman blinked slowly at being addressed before turning towards Hinata with a tilted head. Pale white orbs met a similar pair of eyes before Kaguya spoke in a subdued tone. As well as I can be, considering all that has happened. Hinata's small frown remained as she spoke. If you ever need someone to speak with, then I wouldn't mind lending an ear for you. The woman's gesture was appreciated but ultimately unneeded. You need not to go out of your way for me. Thank you, regardless, she responded quietly. Before Hinata could respond, a group of Anbu appeared around Naruto, who didn't seem perturbed by their sudden appearance. Hokage-sama. The bird-masked member spoke aloud. They are here, he informed. Naruto was silent for a moment before sighing quietly and slowly standing to his feet. They weren't supposed to arrive for another week, but... He shook his head, ending that trail of thought before glancing towards Kaguya and holding out his hand for the woman. Duty calls, Heim. Kaguya silently took his hand while slowly standing to her feet and moving closer to the blonde man. The hand she held slowly vacated its position before finding purchase on her lower back. Do you want me to walk you home? He questioned quietly, not caring about the individuals who were certainly staring at them. Kaguya's eyes slowly closed as she succumbed to the gentle touch of her lover. She rested her head against his toned chest, taking care to position her horns away from his neck. I will be fine, my love. She responded quietly with a hint of embarrassment, not used to such public displays of affection. Not that she minded or anything. Naruto said nothing as he ran his hand through her long tresses of snowy hair. He placed a gentle kiss atop her crown, knowing how she felt about public displays of affection. He squeezed her tightly and made to pull away, though he was surprised when the woman pulled him back. When he tilted his head to stare down at her, she presented a chaste kiss upon his lips. It was quick and slightly awkward, but Naruto didn't truly care about the specifics. He was just surprised the woman had been the one to initiate it. His cerulean orbs stared down into Kaguya's pale orbs as a small smile formed on his face. After a moment though, the woman averted her gaze with a red face. I will be home as soon as possible, Haim. Kaguya swallowed her anxiety and responded quietly. And I will be waiting for you. Naruto gave one last gentle smile before he and the group of Anbu near them disappeared in a yellow flash. The horned goddess stood still for several moments while her arms slowly fell limp to her side. She felt like the world was sitting atop her shoulders and threatening to crush her. Her pale orbs slowly fell to the vibrant tile of the establishment as her chest tightened. Anxiety threatened to tear her core apart as she stood like a statue. Hoping, praying that she wasn't the center of attention now that Naruto disappeared. But she refused to look. Refused to raise her gaze and see the looks of resentment, fear, hatred. Kaguya's clawed fingers flexed anxiously as she squeezed her eyes tightly. She tried with all her might to push out the pervasive thoughts that threatened to drown her but she couldn't. And like the coward she was, she fled. A distorted portal appeared directly below her as she fell through it, disappearing and running away from the judgmental looks. You've been here for several hours. Kaguya's eyes slowly opened, yet she remained motionless. Her snowy orbs centered on the gravestone directly in front of her as her expression remained blank. And you've been observing me for just as long. She replied back. Sasuke stood several feet behind the woman as he stared at her kneeled form. He was quiet for a moment before responding quietly. A safe haven. He searched quietly. Kaguya was quiet for several moments as she studied the gravestone of Tsunade Senju before responding lowly. Did he ask you to watch over me? The Uchiha responded quietly as he strode closer. Call it a favor. You do not strike me as a man who does things out of their graciousness of their heart. Despite how condescending the statement sounded, Kaguya meant no disrespect. Sasuke understood what the goddess meant and came to stop directly beside her. You'd be correct, he responded back simply. And the reason you are here? She questioned just as easily. Sasuke was silent for several minutes as he too stared at the grave that Naruto had personally made for Tsunade. You are too harsh on yourself, he finally stated. Whatever Kaguya had expected the Uchiha to say, it was most certainly not that. She blinked silently before finally tearing her gaze away from the grave. Her pale orbs stared into Sasuke's mismatched eyes for a moment before she responded. I, solely, am responsible for the suffering that plagued this world. My selfish desires snuffed out the lives of the innocent, the pure, and the wicked. Her gaze hardened as she glared into Sasuke's Rinnegan. Whatever advice you have for me, keep to yourself. I will forever live with this burden and knowledge. I do not deserve this second chance. I do not deserve happiness. Her tone rose an octave higher as her chakra began to leak out angrily. I deserve nothing. The immediate surroundings, sans for Sasuke and Tsunade's grave, was instantly reduced to dust and ash. Her wave of anger had quite literally tore the earth asunder. Sasuke weathered the woman's outburst with a straight face, not intimidated or worried in the slightest. And yet, Naruto believes otherwise. He stated simply. Before Kaguya could respond, a warm and calming aura settled in the area followed by a bright, golden flash. Naruto appeared beside his lover bathed in the chakra cloak of his Biju. His unique eyes glanced towards Sasuke for a mere moment before he turned his attention back to his lover. Crouching beside Kaguya, he spoke softly while outstretching his hand. Come, Haim. It was a simple gesture followed by an even simpler suggestion. But those simple gestures. They meant everything to Kaguya. She wordlessly grasped the man's hand as her anger willed to nothing. Her thoughts cleared and it felt as if she was floating on clouds. A sense of weightlessness encroached around her and she allowed the feeling to wash over her. When Kaguya opened her eyes, she was no longer kneeling in front of Tsunade's grave. Instead, she was in Naruto's mindscape, coming face to face with his Biju. The ginormous fox was laying down with its head resting atop its human-like hands. Its breathing was slow, alluding to the fact that the beast was napping. The goddess turned her attention away from the fox to stare at her lover with an expectant gaze. She did not need to voice her question, he likely already knew. "Privacy," he said knowingly. The blond man proceeded to sit on the surface of the water in his mindscape. His eyes found hers and he patted the water directly in front of him. "Sit, Haim." The pale-skinned goddess stared at the man for a second before acquiescing. Her hands folded neatly in her lap as her attention centered on Naruto's voice. An action that caused a small smile to appear on Naruto's face. She was so beautiful. "Talk to me, Kaguya-chan." He started softly. "What is wrong?" A small frown marred the woman's face as she stared into the cerulean orbs of her lover. What was wrong? Naruto knew what was wrong. "I can't help you if you don't talk to me, Haim." Frustration swelled in her bosom as her gaze fell to the watery floor of the man's shared mindscape. Her claw-like nails raked against her ceremonial kimono as she struggled to voice her problems. After several minutes in silence, Kaguya finally spoke. "Why?" Her voice was small and unsure as she continued. "Why have you gone so far for me? Why do you continue to do so?" Tears of frustration began to drip down her beautiful face as she continued. "I don't deserve any of this. I've accepted that I'll never be accepted in this world." Kaguya clenched her eyes tightly and bowed her head low. "My hands are stained. I'm a monster. This regret, this pain." Kaguya's claws raked through her clothing, drawing blood upon her thighs as she spoke once more. "I never wanted this. I can't do this anymore." There was complete silence following her emotional outburst, but she cared not for it. Tears fell down her face like a faucet and she dare not try to stop them. "If I could take it back I would. I'd have never eaten that accursed fruit." Sadness began to resurface from deep within her as she struggled to control her emotions. "My race only knows destruction. I was a fool to ever think I could be a human. To think that I could be different. You are not a monster, Kaguya." Kaguya's snowy white orbs snapped towards Naruto the instant those words left his mouth. She wanted to refute those words. To scream at him about how wrong he was. But she couldn't, because deep down, she wanted to believe it. Wanted to believe she was different. Wanted to believe she was more like a human. Naruto's hand slowly lifted from his lap and found purchase on Kaguya's cheek. His thumb gingerly stroked her cheek before slowly wiping away her tears. "I can sense the regret that you hold every day. I know that it eats at you every night and keeps you awake." Naruto's eyes softened as he placed his other hand on top of Kaguya's clasped hands. "But you aren't a monster. Would a monster truly feel regret for their actions?" The goddess averted her gaze after that question and stared at the ground in sadness. Of course they wouldn't. But she had still done the actions and nothing would change that. "Hey," he began softly while slowly raising the woman's gaze back to him. "Time heals all wounds, Kaguya. There are plenty of things that you can do for self-atonement. But just know that you're not alone. I'll always be here and I'll stand beside you to help you find your inner peace. Even if it kills me." Tears coalesced in Kaguya's eyes once again as she stared into Naruto's eyes. The amount of love and adoration he was showing. The pale-skinned woman practically launched herself at the man, knocking him to the ground as she straddled his abdomen. "I do not deserve you," was all she said as her lips descended upon his. Naruto glanced at his company and took note of their widened eyes and frightful expressions. It was completely understandable, he thought. Kaguya was not an individual that the average person or even shinobi for that matter, could stand next to. Her mere presence caused those around her to become uncomfortable. Mainly in part due to her lack of control over her power. She wasn't aware of how little control she actually possessed over it. Which was a conundrum in itself. It wasn't as if she couldn't control the finer aspects of her abilities, because she certainly could. But she struggled to rein in her power, and that was something that frightened people. It would be like he or Sasuke walking around while carelessly bearing their chakra down upon the earth. He would need to speak with her about it. But he still wanted to have fun with the situation at hand, and so, he would. Naruto raised an amused eyebrow at the group in front of him before speaking. Is everything okay? The group of individuals were silent for a moment before one of the men, a rather important business prospector who wanted to expand his railroad business, spoke nervously. Why, you didn't feel that power? The hero of the Fourth Shinobi War raised an eyebrow once more while adopting a confused expression. What do you mean? I felt nothing. The man seemed taken aback by the Nanadime Hokage's reaction and spluttered for a moment. That power. It shook the village. His eyes left the blonde cages as he turned towards his associates. I'm not going crazy, am I? His associates nodded their heads with varying degrees of fear and uncertainty. Naruto was just amused at the entire ordeal. Well, whatever it was, I'm sure it's being handled. He replied rather flippantly while waving his hand lazily. Come now, we have much to discuss about your business. The last train I rode in, I had to save the country it resided in. Let's hope I don't have to do that again. Thank you for your time, Hokage-sama. The businessman bowed low, his workers and associates following suit. We at Zeta Corp appreciate all that you've done. Naruto slowly stood to his feet, towering over the group and offering them a small smile. It was my pleasure, and I hope that your business thrives and we see the usage of this transportation grow in the coming years. The blonde cage shook the man's hand while seeing the group out. Once the group vacated the office, his smile disappeared as he spoke quietly. Follow them, he ordered quietly to seemingly no one. I don't trust their intentions for 1 second. Take a squad with you and watch over them for the next several months. Bi-weekly updates and you have full authorization to exterminate them if evidence comes to the surface. After he finished speaking, a shinobi seemed to materialize out of thin air just in front of the blonde man. The shinobi was rather short and possessed ebony, spiky hair. Their mask was completely blank, unlike the usual animal-themed Anbu masks. Permission for off-grid recruitment, Hokage-sama. The unknown shinobi requested respectfully. Naruto turned his back against the shinobi and stared out into the village. Choose who you wish. Squad of 4 only. No more. Hi, Hokage-sama. The shinobi seemed to just dematerialize after his statement. The blonde cage continued to gaze out into the village for several minutes. He knew that Sasuke was in the room and Sasuke knew that he knew. They are bold. Sasuke finally spoke aloud. He slowly strode towards Naruto's position before standing beside the man and staring out into the village. Naruto glanced at the Uchiha for a moment before crossing his arms against his chest. To have the gall and audacity to come directly to me. It seems the outside world has stopped fearing us. The Rinnegan wielder was quiet for a few moments before shaking his head. The time of shinobi is coming to an end, Naruto. Sasuke narrowed his eyes for a moment before speaking. Stagnation will be the death of our kin. Naruto frowned for a moment before furrowing his eyebrows. I am well aware. If you are aware, then you know what will happen when those rogue Otsutsuki decide to finally visit. Sasuke's Rinnegan glowed for a moment as he stared directly at Naruto. The world cannot aid, we will be alone. Naruto turned his head towards his brother, meeting the man's gaze head-on. We do not need aid. They will be crushed. The 2 strongest men in the elemental nations stared into each other's eyes before it was broken by Sasuke. We should be the one searching for them, he proposed quietly. Naruto sighed quietly as his gaze returned to the village. We have no idea where to even begin. How do you propose we accomplish that? Kaguya lacks the information that we need. Sasuke said nothing in response and continued to stare out into the village. What happened? Naruto questioned quietly. The Uchiha was silent for a moment before speaking. An emotional outburst. Naruto nodded silently before sighing. Her regret continues to grow. Sasuke glanced at Naruto out the corner of his eyes before responding. Do your job. Naruto's eyebrow twitched in annoyance at the statement. Don't you have a daughter to raise? He asked in annoyance. A small smirk formed on Sasuke's face before the man disappeared in a burst of speed, leaving Naruto alone. I hate Uchihas. Naruto grumbled quietly to himself and his personal Anbu squad watching over him. Kaguya released a quiet sigh of pleasure as she sank into her tub of scalding hot water. A small cloud of fog filled the entire room due to the extreme heat of the water. The woman's long tresses splayed out beneath her as she rested her head on the rim of the porcelain tub. Her eyes slowly closed and another sigh of pleasure released from her throat. Relaxing. Comforting. The horned goddess gingerly ran her fingers along the walls of her extravagant tub. A gift from her lover. One he was all too happy to build for her. She appreciated it immensely even if it was far too big, in her opinion at least. This tub could fit at least 5 individuals with little to no problem. Naruto always went out of his way for her. Always showering her with gifts, trinkets, and affection. He was. Well, there wasn't a word that could accurately describe what Naruto was. Understanding, loving, empathetic, compassionate. He was, himself. And she absolutely loved that aspect. Kaguya felt a pair of rough and callous hands rest atop her shoulders. A sigh of appreciation left her as the individual's hands worked her muscles. Forgive me, my love. My guests took their sweet time in explaining all the benefits that Konoha would get from this transaction. An amused hum left Naruto's throat as he dug his thumbs into the woman's shoulders. They layered their words with honey, but deep down I could sense the poison that rested between the cracks. Kaguya's hands gripped the side of the tub as she released a tiny moan of appreciation. I trust that everything will work out, yes. By the gods, his hands were like heaven. Naruto chuckled lightly before replying. I have Sanji watching over them. If anything happens, then he will handle it. It took a great deal of effort for the goddess to reply without moaning, but she was eventually successful in her endeavor. How are you so good at this? She asked in a slightly breathy tone. Once again, the blonde man released a hearty chuckle at the woman's question. Lots of practice. Eros Sennin took me to a lot of brothels during our training trip. A soft smile appeared on his face as he reminisced on the old memories of his time with Jiraiya. He said it was for business, and I thought he was full of shit. Turns out that brothels really do carry a lot of information. Kaguya's eyes slowly opened as she listened to her lover speak on his past. She sat quietly as he continued speaking, enjoying the sound of his voice and ministrations. It was kind of embarrassing at the time, but I got hit on a lot by the women working in those establishments. I was always pretty nervous around women, not knowing what to say or do. Afraid I'd say something stupid or dumb. Naruto released a tiny chuckle that had the corners of Kaguya's lips tugging upwards. And since I definitely wasn't going to partake in their services, I figured I could at least help them in other ways. Took some time, but I got pretty good at giving massages. A sour expression formed on his face though as he continued. But they always managed to mess with me. Always teasing me about where my hands could go and other nonsense related to sexual acts. It was all too much for someone like me at that age. Naruto smiled softly as his hands ran along Kaguya's skin. Boo it. He dragged on softly before crouching low and whispering into one of Kaguya's ears, his lips lightly kissing her neck. It's one of the many skills I possess. Kaguya's hands proceeded to crack the porcelain rim of the tub at her lover's suggestive tone. A healthy blush exploded on her face as the man pulled away while laughing. Why, you are too much. One of Naruto's hands glided along her wet skin before caressing her neck lovingly. He leaned over his lover before staring directly into her pale eyes. I could be a lot more if you want me to. At Kaguya's slightly embarrassed expression, a cheeky smile tugged at his features. Taking advantage of her embarrassed actions, he leaned in and planted a gentle kiss on her lips, in which the woman returned. Naruto began to pull away but was stopped as the woman's hands grasped onto his shirt. His cerulean orbs stared into hers with slight confusion before his eyes widened as he was quite literally lifted off his feet. The Nanadime Hokage was airborne for less than a second before being engulfed in the scorching water of Kaguya's tub. A second passed by before Naruto surfaced, spluttering slightly at the unexpected action his lover had committed. He proceeded to wipe the steaming hot water out of his face while staring directly into Kaguya's amused eyes. Mind your step, my love. The floor is slippery. Naruto blinked a single time at the woman's amused statement before narrowing his eyes. You do realize that you're in wet, correct? I hold all the power here. Her response. Then use that power. Naruto blinked at the woman's response, not truly expecting it. After getting over his brief surprise, Naruto wrapped his arms around the woman before standing up to his full height. Water cascaded down both of their forms as Naruto and Kaguya stared into each other's eyes. Kaguya's legs proceeded to wrap around the waist of her lover as her arms crossed behind his neck. Her face was the same shade as a tomato as the warm water continued to idly drip off of her body. It had been so long since she had last shown someone so much of her body. She was on complete display for Naruto, and that single thought caused a blazing inferno to build from deep within her. Naruto was seeing her. All of her embarrassment, anxiety, apprehension. She wasn't used to this. Before those particular feelings could wash over her, Naruto's lips made contact with her own. His calloused hands moved down her back before gripping her waist tightly. Kaguya released a tiny mewl of pleasure at his touch and proceeded to close her eyes. Her claw-like fingernails dug into the man's back as her legs locked tightly around his waist. "You're so beautiful, Kaguya." The woman opened her eyes, coming face to face with Naruto's loving expression. All the anxiety, all the apprehension, the fear, the uncertainty, all of those feelings just washed away as she stared into his loving gaze. The man that knew her inside and out. The man that knew every little thing about her. The man that she loved. "I am yours, Naruto." Scene. Kaguya returned the man's kiss with a heated one of her own, clawing at his clothed back as their tongues intertwined. The pale-skinned goddess released a breathy moan as Naruto's hands gripped the flesh of her rear. His fingers roughly dug into her pale skin and she had to refrain from bucking her hips. His touch, his scent, she was being driven crazy. Kaguya felt her back make contact with something silky as she idly realized that Naruto had carried her back to their shared bedroom. A massive blush began to form on her face as she finally realized what was going to happen. Her pale orbs gazed up at her lover, who was now straddling her. His eyes, still full of love and affection, now carried a hungry gaze of lust. Lust for her, and only her. Kaguya watched with widened eyes as Naruto relinquished himself of his jacket and shirt. His toned chest and arms on full display as she greedily memorized everything she could. She felt his fingers gently glide on her abdomen and a breathy exhale left her. He proceeded to trace along her stomach before slowly going further south. Kaguya bit her lower lip and shut her eyes as Naruto's finger began to trail down her small patch of pubic hair. She felt a great degree of embarrassment swell within her as his finger began to dance through her small patch of white hair. The woman's embarrassment was immediately erased as she felt the warm digit of her lover prod at her sex. A tiny moan escaped her as his finger rubbed her nether lips in a slow and teasing manner. Kaguya's hands clawed at her silky sheets as she released several heavy exhales. She clenched her jaw tightly and her head dug into the soft fabric of her bed as Naruto's finger slowly entered her wet folds. The pleasure, the ecstasy. Kaguya writhed several times as Naruto slowly pumped his finger inside of her. Her hips rose off the bed several times before Naruto's hand pushed her back down. The man proceeded to lean down atop her, making sure to continue his ministrations, and began to softly nip at her exposed neck. Kaguya released several light moans as Naruto bit and licked her neck. Her hands left the silky sheets before finding purchase atop his back. Her fingernails clawed at his back, but he showed little care for it. "Naruto!" she exclaimed loudly with a breathy exhale. Before she could continue, she felt her walls spread further as Naruto's middle finger joined his index finger in exploring her drenched walls. Oh, by the gods! This was so good. Naruto smirked quietly as he pumped his fingers into the pale-skinned goddess. He began to lightly trail his tongue along her neck before reaching her ear and whispering softly into her ear. "I love you, Kaguya." At his words, she released a rather high-pitched moan followed by her walls clenching tightly around his fingers. Kaguya's hips shot upwards as she experienced her first climax of the night. Despite the fact her eyes were closed, she was sure that they crossed. Her toes curled harshly and her claw-like nails dug deep into Naruto's back. Her lower body shook several times before abruptly dropping back onto the silky sheets of the bed. Sweat glistened off her pale skin as she exhales heavily. She felt Naruto's weight vacate her body briefly but thought little of it. Kaguya's breathing finally managed to level out and she slowly opened her tired eyes. Her pale eyes widened as she stared at Naruto, who was now. Her lower body trembled slightly as she stared at his. "Oh, Kami." Naruto was atop her in an instant and she was loath to stop him. She felt the man's enlarged member make contact with her nether lips and released a tiny moan at the thought of it piercing her. Naruto rubbed the tip of his appendage against Kaguya's walls, using the woman's comb as lubrication. Her moans of appreciation spurred him on and he throbbed greatly as she exhales harshly. Kaguya. He spoke in a raspy tone as his enlarged member prodded at her soaking entrance. The woman's eyes opened as she began to instinctively spread her legs. The pale-skinned goddess stared directly into her lover's eyes before speaking quietly. "Make me yours, Naruto." After her statement, Kaguya released an incredibly loud moan as Naruto entered her. Her fingernails bit into his back harshly as she was stretched. Her head impacted against the mattress as her eyes clenched tightly. He was so big. Kaguya. Naruto grunted loudly as the woman's walls tightened around him like a vice. His eyes were entranced as he watched his slowly disappear inside the woman. He began to push further and further ever so slowly, allowing Kaguya to adjust to his size. Naruto hissed in pleasure as the woman continued to tighten around him. His thick member throbbed harshly as Kaguya gyrated her hips. Take me." The blonde man didn't need to be told twice. He pulled back until only the head of his appendage was left inside before instantly sheathing himself once more. The action caused Kaguya to moan in appreciation as she allowed the man to dictate the pace. His soon began to piston in and out at a rather harsh pace, but she cared little. He felt so good. Kaguya's bounced rhythmically as her lover pounded her walls. She released several guttural moans as the man's throbbing head continued to stretch her out further and further. Naruto grunted quietly as his rhythm began to slow. His hardened member throbbed harshly and he grit his teeth tightly trying to prevent his oncoming orgasm. Kaguya moaned lowly at his slower pace before opening one of her eyes, taking in Naruto's sweaty form as he penetrated her. The sight of her lover was enough for her walls to clench tightly as another wave of ecstasy crashed into her. Her hands left Naruto as she began to rip through the silky fabric of her bed. "Naruto!" she exclaimed loudly as her body tensed up harshly. A rather harsh orgasm slammed into her as her vision exploded, experiencing small bursts of stars. The sight of his lover experiencing her second orgasm was too much for Naruto. Coupled with the fact that the woman's walls were squeezing him with reckless abandon on top of already being close. Kaguya. Naruto grunted loudly before sheathing himself fully inside. His hardened member throbbed a single time before he eventually came, painting the woman's walls. Kaguya's legs clenched around her lover, preventing him from pulling out even if he had wanted to. The warm excess began to slowly seep out of Kaguya's walls as she moaned lowly. Naruto exhaled harshly as he fell atop his lover. Both lovers laid motionless for several seconds as they came down from their respective orgasms. It was Naruto who spoke first. "I love you, Kaguya. I'll love you too." End Naruto. Scene end. "She has hidden herself well." A figure clad in all white spoke aloud. The man possessed a unique horn that wrapped around his head. But she couldn't hide forever. The man placed his hand on a mirror-like object that was currently showing a picture of Kaguya's location. The woman was seen laying in the arms of a blonde man with both of them sleeping. "Mingling with humans again. For shame Kaguya Heim." A different voice resounded out loud. This individual possessed a slightly jovial tone and he too possessed horns atop his head, though he had brown horns that grew from the back of his head and wrapped around to his forehead, with a small gap in between them. "Come Arashiki. Let us prepare," the first horned Otsutsuki ordered. The now named Arashiki glanced at his compatriot for a moment before smirking. "Prepare?" he questioned mockingly. "We can crush them easily, Ashiki. Let's just end this now." Ashiki adopted a fierce expression as he glared directly at Arashiki, bearing the full might of his chakra upon his relative. "And end up like Momoshiki and Kinshiki. I will not take this lightly." His pupils began to glow an amber orange with black sclera surrounding them as he continued harshly. "Do as I say." With that parting statement, the powerful Otsutsuki member left the room, not caring for Arashiki's response. Arashiki glared at his relative with hate before scoffing loudly and returning his attention back to Kaguya and her monkey partner. He stared at them for several minutes before scoffing loudly and producing a red chakra hook. "How tough can this little shit be?" And boom. That's it. Opening parenthesis colon. Okay, so I know I said I wasn't going to make this a story and I'm still kind of iffy on the decision, but as you can see, I set the story up in a way that if I choose to continue it, it'll have some kind of plot with it involving the remaining Otsutsuki members. Anyway. Review and shit. See ya idiots. Chapter 3. Witness True Horror. The new age was, well, confusing, Kaguya mused quietly to herself. Her all-seeing eyes gazed upon the village of Konoha, taking in the beautiful lights and glorious sights. According to Naruto, the village had expanded nearly 8 times its original size since the ending of the Fourth Shinobi World War. An entire nation created off the backbone of peace and prosperity. It was an ambitious expedition for the reigning clans during that tumultuous time period where children killed other children for sport. A time where men targeted women to prevent the birth of new children, bred to fight battles they didn't understand. Humanity had always been of a self-righteous belief. They were arrogant to a degree that could rival her own family, and that was certainly saying something. Whereas her clan and race could back their words, humans could not do so. More bark than bite, as the saying went. Humans were a fragile thing. Broken by the smallest of things and susceptible to egregious acts of violence and cruelty if given leeway. That therein lay the issue and heart of her thoughts. If humanity was as corrupted and as terrible as she believed it to be, then why was she so hell-bent on protecting it and nurturing it? Whatcha thinking 'bout, Heim? The presence of her beloved finally made himself known. She needn't turn his way to see his curious expression, blue eyes filled with care and love. He had been watching her for the better part of 30 minutes, content with allowing her to ponder and think. For that, she appreciated it. With his ability to sense negative emotions, one could not blame her for being rather cross when it came to boundaries of the heart and mind. Kaguya truly loved the man, she honestly did, but there were some days where she wished to wallow in misery without having to worry about her attentive and worrywart husband. Perhaps she was still somewhat twisted in that regard. No sane individual could possibly enjoy being miserable every waking moment of the day. A soft sigh escaped from her lips as she shifted quietly, hands unfolding from their previous position upon her lap. She turned her towards her beloved, gesturing for him to join her on the mountain ledge. Which he did so without question. Ever the loyal and loving man she knew him to be, he plopped himself down, nearly falling into her lap with how careless he was. But she knew otherwise. He was trying to get a reaction from her, but she would not entertain his 5 childish antics. A moment of silence passed by as the recently wed couple stared down into the massive village. A gentle breeze swept through the mountainous monument, jostling the goddess's hair. Kaguya was curious about what the average human perceived as reality. It was an odd line of thought, but she truly wished to know if the humans that lacked the ability to utilize their chakra understood just how inferior they were to shinobi. Perhaps she was being unnecessarily cruel to them, even prejudiced against them to a certain degree, but call it a fallacy of her upbringing. After witnessing your sister be consumed for perceived weakness, would you wish to be normal? To be thought of as weak and inferior? Nay, never again. But her beloved was gazing directly at her, head tilted with a raised eyebrow. If she didn't answer soon, she'd be on the receiving end of a game that one Ino Yamanaka called 20 questions. How weak you humans are. She replied simply, gazing down at the massive village, watching as the citizens mingled with one another aimlessly. Something she envied like no other. Naruto's raised eyebrow rose even higher at the response. He proceeded to lean his body towards her, left arm wrapping around her shoulder to pull her flush against him. Kaguya allowed him the privilege to do so. And no, she did not blush at the contact, nor did she release a meek sound for his actions. Anyone that said otherwise would meet a swift end at the hand of her all-killing ash bones. That's certainly an interesting line of thought. What makes us so weak, Kaguya-chan? There was no animosity in his voice. No judging, no annoyance. Just curiosity. The goddess was silent for a short time, pondering his question. You break easily. Choose to be less when you can be so much more. Willingly choose to stagnate instead of evolve. It is infuriating to witness. There was a hint of agitation that seeped out from her words. She hadn't meant for it to happen, of course, but it had been something brewing in her mind for centuries. Kaguya just couldn't understand it. Naruto was silent as he took in the information. A quiet hum resonated from his throat as he joined his wife in staring down at the village. A brief period of silence passed for the next 5 or so minutes as the blonde meticulously found the correct wording. Because we are human, he stated so simply, so assuredly. Judging by Kaguya's annoyed expression, it did little to help her. If you wished to annoy me, then you have accomplished your goal, beloved. Her tone was wet with derisiveness, acid dripping just on the edge of legitimate anger and frustration. In any other circumstance, Naruto would have teased her, attacking her with a sly remark that would surely net him a tongue lashing from the regal woman. However, he knew that now wasn't the time. Kaguya was drifting on a dangerous precipice, whether she knew it or not. These were the same thoughts she had possessed when adopting her plan of worldwide domination and control. Naruto highly doubted that she'd revert out of the blue, choosing to continue her eon-old plan of sucking the chakra out of the world, but it was better to be safe than sorry. Kaguya was an alien after all, descended from a race of beings that possessed outlandish and disturbing ideals. I meant no disrespect, Haim. He replied truthfully, gently squeezing the woman's shoulder. As humans, there is no expectations of grandeur. No need to be seen as the strongest or the mightiest. We are born, small and fragile. Here, her husband turned his attention back unto the village, watching as families went about their daily business. And we die, small and fragile. Life for us, it is limited. We actively die the longer we continue to live. Pausing for a moment, his eyes focused on a particular family, watching them as they meandered their way through one of Konoha's major marketplace. Being a human, he paused again, rubbing her shoulder tenderly. There is nothing grandiose about it. If you ignore the surrounding stimuli of one's birth, you would see how similar you are to us. He turned his head to gaze into her pupil-less eyes, speaking softly. Despite what many would believe, no one is born with some prophesized destiny that predetermines what they will or won't do in their life. The only person that is allowed to tell you what you can and can't do, is yourself. Not fate, not some god, and certainly not some ancient race of homicidal aliens fixated on universal domination. At the end, his tone had turned slightly cheeky, fit with a small smile. One that briefly caused the woman's own lips to upturn. She'd deny that it ever happened though. Allowing Naruto's ego to grow even larger would only be detrimental. She'd never hear the end of it. If you still don't believe me, then look no further than yourself. He continued when Kaguya showed no signs of responding. You're an Otsutsuki, a race of beings that wish to transcend into something beyond mortal comprehension by swallowing all life in the universe. And yet, here you are, married to a lowly human that you perceive to be weak. Here at last, Kaguya finally responded. A scoff vacated her lips as she furrowed her eyebrows. You are clearly an outlier in that regard. I'm sure you'd earn even the respect of the elders for how powerful you are. Naruto playfully rolled his eyes at her words. I'm not sure if I should be flattered or disrespected by that statement. In a posh tone, one that practically dripped with arrogance, Kaguya responded. Be thankful. Ho! The Hokage exclaimed playfully. Look at you, making jokes. I'm so proud of you, Haim. He pulled the woman into his chest, maneuvering away from her horns and stroking her scalp with his fingers. Kaguya did not hiss, nor did she growl like a feral beast. Royalty would never. She was a regal woman. Powerful and mighty. To stoop to his level would be admitting defeat and inferiority. Grr, cease thy foolishness at once. Unhand me, heathen, she growled in a very unladylike manner, desperately trying to pry her husband's hand from atop her crown. Curse you, I say. Curse. Relinquish my hair or suffer. Naruto's playful smile only grew as he allowed the woman her wishes. But only for a moment, of course. He did enjoy embarrassing her every now and then. With a speed that shocked Kaguya, Naruto's hand wrapped around her abdomen, all but dragging her into his lap. His other hand immediately wrapped around the goddess, ensnaring her. Kaguya, ever the regal and proper woman that she was, absolutely flushed at the action. What is that you're doing, Naruto? He ignored her words, pulling the woman closer to him whilst stroking her stomach in slow circles. He leaned his head down, mindful of her horns, and whispered into one of her ears. Shush, be silent, he demanded. In normal circumstances, Kaguya wouldn't be corralled so easily. Regal as she was, Kaguya was still a being that respected power. Not to a degree like her clansmen, but when a powerful man, such as her husband, ordered her to do something, she did it. And so, the horned goddess remained silent, pale cheeks practically flaming red as her lover made gentle ministrations upon her body. The silence stretched on for what felt like several minutes as Naruto continued to caress the woman. With his lips brushing up against her ear, he spoke quietly. The mighty and powerful goddess. Brought low by a mere human. His tongue circled around the lobe of her ear, causing a vicious tremor to rack Kaguya's body. But I am nothing more than a weak human, no. Kaguya wished to protest his words, denying them and explaining how he was different than the rest. Her eyes fluttered shut, trembles coursing through her body as Naruto's hands gently glided over her abdomen. With a throaty gasp, Kaguya responded in a breathy tone. I jest, my love. And nothing more than a lapse of judgment. She released a quiet sigh as Naruto's hands finally ceased. A trickle of sweat threatened to fall from her brow as she closed her eyes. Her racing heart slowly began to calm, finally relaxing. It, however, was short-lived when Naruto's fingers toyed with her robes. Her white orbs snapped open in a mixture of shock and horror as her husband tore a large hole in her clothing. The bitter bite of cold air swept across her pale skin, causing goosebumps to form atop her skin. If she thought her heart had been beating rapidly before, then it was practically racing now. Naruto, she cried, hands moving to cover her body instinctively. However, she soon found that she was unable to move her appendages due to something restricting them. Her white eyes snapped down, spotting a thin shadow wrapping around her body and wrists, holding her in place. Shish. Naruto lulled quietly, yin chakra seeping out of his body to restrict Kaguya and keep her hands bound. Should I demonstrate how powerful I am for you? The pale-skinned beauty only grunted quietly as her wrists were pulled further back, causing her back to arch almost painfully so. From her arched position, she could now eye her husband, watching him with equal parts arousal and shock. I in public, she squeaked. Here. We cannot. It's. A toothy smirk, one that caused Kaguya to shiver, spread across Naruto's features. It's what? His fingers now began to glide up her stomach, trailing across her exposed ribs and coming dangerously close to cupping her supple. Kaguya resisted the urge to moan. A keening whine escaped her lips as she mounted her response. It's indecent. A breathy exhale escaped her as she turned her head to the side, face aflame in embarrassment. What was that? Naruto questioned, roughly cupping Kaguya's and squeezing. Kaguya was incapable of holding back the moan. It was a shrill thing, high-pitched and wanting. She ignored the pain and pleasure, responding to her husband's question. Someone will see us. She exhaled heavily as Naruto released her bosom, fingers gently gliding down back to her abdomen. Good girl. He praised quietly, gently running his fingers lower and lower until. This is considered illegal, Naruto. A new voice entered the clearing, one that was stoic and belonged to a certain dual-eyed prick with a penchant for stabbing anything that moved. Kaguya's eyeballs practically popped out of her skull as Sasuke's voice echoed in the clearing. The embarrassment increased nearly tenfold as she desperately tried to break free of her bondages. It was all for naught as Naruto refused to allow her to budge. Naruto! She cried loudly, struggling against her chakra restraints. Naruto sighed quietly to himself before releasing his hold on his wife whilst making sure her body was hidden from view. It took Kaguya a few seconds to completely cover her body back up, no thanks in part due to Naruto's barbaric treatment of her robes. The pale-skinned goddess pulled her robes tightly across her body, falling to her knees and refusing to turn around. She was already embarrassed enough. So sorry to interrupt your private time. May I suggest you continue in the privacy of your home? Sasuke spoke in a bland tone. Naruto rolled his eyes before stroking Kaguya's back and planting a gentle kiss atop her crown. He knew that she wasn't going to contribute to the conversation after being caught doing something intimate. She was a private woman through and through. He'd make it up to her tonight. Yeah. What do you want? Naruto slowly stood to his feet before making his way over to his wayward brother. Sasuke deliberately glanced at Kaguya for a moment before returning his gaze to Naruto. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Naruto understood what he was conveying immediately. They attacked nearly a week later. Kaguya idly strolled through one of the various marketplaces of Konoha. In her left hand, she held an old-fashioned basket, woven from twine and wood, that held various ingredients and food. Much time had passed since she stepped foot in Konoha. Nearly 2 years had passed since Naruto unsealed her to kill Momoshiki. It seemed like it was just yesterday that she had feared even stepping foot in public. Now, no longer did she fear the judging gazes from the populace. She no longer shied away from the hatred and fear. It was not that it bothered her, because it certainly still did, she just learned to accept it. Naruto was an advocate of forgiving and forgetting. However, her husband was an outlier in that regard. The average person could not just forgive and forget. It was hard enough for people to accept her existence, let alone be aware of the fact that she had orchestrated various catastrophes that plagued their world. Kaguya didn't much blame the populace for loathing her existence. She'd do so too if she was a weak individual, incapable of standing up to the god that once wreaked havoc upon their land. But just because she didn't blame them for how they felt didn't mean that she'd tolerate negative treatment. There had only been one incident regarding someone foolish enough to test her patience. The less that was said, the better. The goddess was roused from her thoughts by a familiar voice. Kaguya-chan. The goddess blinked at the feminine voice, head turning to the side and spotting a curvy, blonde woman. Yamanaka-san. She nodded her head politely, greeting the beautiful woman. Nay, Kaguya-chan. Ino whined playfully, slowly wading her way towards the pale-skinned woman. Always so formal. Had it been anyone else then Kaguya would have turned her nose up, ignoring the individual altogether. However, she rather enjoyed the company of Ino. The woman was a free spirit. Uncaring of how others viewed her and not afraid to speak her mind regardless of what others believed. Kaguya envied the woman for that. It is what's expected of me. Kaguya found herself saying, speaking in a bland tone. A raised eyebrow was the response that Ino gave. Kaguya wanted to scoff. Of course. How had she forgotten? Yamanaka was a woman who studied the mind. An expert in the dealings with the human psyche and brain. She could pick apart thoughts and gestures with a degree that was frightening. It was one of the many things that Kaguya respected about the woman. Albeit, who expects you to act like that? 'Cause I highly doubt Naruto cares whether or not you're prim and proper like a queen. The beautiful woman shrugged her shoulders lazily, one of her hips out as she continued. And I doubt you give a rat's ass about the opinions of the general populace. Correct. As usual. Sometimes this woman could be infuriating. Not due to her personality but because of her specialty. She hated being dissected with such ease. It reminded her far too much of her clansmen. Kaguya was silent for several seconds before ultimately sighing. A force of habit. Her words were distant, resigned even. Thankfully, Ino didn't push. Instead, the woman eyed her makeshift basket with interest. What's for dinner? Kaguya blinked at the question before replying impulsively. Oh, I'm sorry, are you to join us tonight? There was a bit of snark that entered her regal tone, so much so that it surprised even Kaguya. Ino's eyes widened for a moment before her expression shifted to an impressed one. She nodded her head with a pleased expression as she responded. Ooh, sassy. I like it. Is Naruto's sarcasm finally catching on? Kaguya's momentary shock abated as a flat expression formed on her face. Cease thy foolishness. It was merely a slip of the tongue. Ino giggled quietly as she leaned against one of the stalls set up in the marketplace with her back to it. She rose herself up a bit before placing her rump onto the wooden stall, ignoring the lingering gaze of the stall owner who didn't necessarily mind. Kaguya's eyes nearly rolled as she spotted the man's hungry gaze upon Ino's derriere. Men were such simple creatures. She returned her gaze to Ino, who only gave her a knowing smile. Of course, Kaguya mused quietly with a roll of the eyes. The little minx loved to show off her body. She was an attention seeker and she didn't care who knew. She relished having all eyes on her, whether they be male or female. Ya know. Ino began, speaking in a low tone. If ya strut your stuff more often then maybe Naruto would take you in public. Kaguya's cheeks flamed just at the thought of doing something so scandalous for attention. She nearly sputtered then and there before taking a calming breath. I need not stoop to such humiliating depths to seek my lover's gaze. Ino's smile only grew bigger at Kaguya's response. Ah, but what's so humiliating about that, Kaguya-chan? Without thinking of the potential consequences from answering the woman's question, Kaguya responded. I am not some consort to be used solely for pleasures of the flesh. Kaguya realized her peril too late. Ino had that gleam in her eyes now. The Yamanaka's grin was practically sinful. But that's the fun part, Kaguya-chan. Before Kaguya could stop her, Ino continued with half-lidded eyes. Just imagine it. Naruto bends you over in. She points to her left over her shoulder, highlighting a vacant alley. That alleyway and has his way with you. You're in public. People are all around you and you want to moan as he pounds you. But you can't. The woman's eyes seem to almost grow manic as her grin grows larger. So all you can do is bite your lips and cover your mouth with your hands so you don't alert anyone around. But then Naruto does the unthinkable. Ino paused for dramatic effect and Kaguya found herself leaning in to hear what the woman would say, ignoring the burning sensation upon her cheeks. He pushes your face against the dirty walls of the alleys and pulls both your arms back. Now, you can't even cover your cries with your hands. Completely at his mercy as he pounds you from behind. Come on Kaguya-chan, doesn't that sound wonderful? Kaguya's face was flaming at the end of Ino's imaginary scenario. It did sound wonder. No, nay, such thoughts of debauchery were beneath her. Before she could mount a response, something pricked at the back of her neck. Her eyes widened a second later as she felt it. Kaguya moved faster than Ino could even hope to comprehend, shielding the woman's body with her own as a massive explosion erupted beneath their feet. A horrendous flash of white light followed by the ear-piercing ringing noise of having her eardrums burst. Ino's dazed mind was frantic as she desperately tried to move. Her body wouldn't allow her to do so. Had she been paralyzed from the sudden attack? She wiggled a toe. No, not paralyzed. Adrenaline fueled her veins, ears still ringing and eyes adjusting to the darkness. Her body. It was in agony. The mere thought of moving from her downed position sent horrendous quakes through her muscles. A burning sensation emanated from near her stomach as she clenched her eyes shut. With ringing ears, Ino made to move her arms but found that she couldn't. What was happening? The next thing she knew, a bright light shone directly upon her face. It caused her to cringe and she jerked her head away from it. That was a mistake as it only caused more pain. A throbbing pain emanated from the side of her skull. Had she banged her head against loose debris? The ringing in her ears was becoming unbearable. Opening her eyes once more, Ino was able to make out the form of something white. Through her blurry vision the thing was directly above her. She continued to blink in confusion. Definitely a concussion. Why did she feel so sleepy? A nap would be good. Yeah, that sounds good. As she began to close her eyes, a burning pain blazed around her face followed by something wet and cool. Ino's eyes finally managed to make out the white blue above her. It was Kaguya. Oh. Her lips were moving rapidly and her face was pinched in worry. What was wrong? Why was Kaguya so worried? Street. P. Van. G. T's. Oin. T. Bo. Y. Ino blinked once before everything went black. A splendid day for death and chaos. Oh, how he loved slaughter. Mindless killings and displays of violence. Hey, ants. The lot of them. What Kaguya seen in these monkeys was beyond him. But this is the start. No. Kaguya had to pay for her actions. She couldn't be allowed to live after what she's done. She'd be consumed and if he was lucky, he'd probably get first priority over the majority of her power. Ishiki was a hard ass, but he did know how to haggle with the best of them. Should he kill Kaguya quickly? Strike her down before she could react? Or should he prolong her suffering? Break her body and destroy her mind? Force her to watch as he gutted that blonde monkey she had laid with? The possibilities were endless. Landing softly upon the charred ruins of what these mongrels used to provide for themselves, the pale-skinned man slowly made his way towards his cousin's position. Pupil-less, white eyes lazily focused upon the smoking crater that he had created. He could sense Kaguya and some unknown monkey in it. It seemed as if the unknown monkey was currently dying, if the dimming life force was anything to go by. Hey, a 2-for-1, It must be his lucky day. A translucent gourd of red chakra emanated from his right hip, pulsating with chaotic chakra. The pale-skinned man reached into the chakra hours before pulling out what appeared to be a fish hook, bathed in the same hue and chakra as the gourd itself. The man then proceeded to lazily swing his odd weapon of choice, ignoring those around him who had survived his initial attack. He could sense dozens of chakra signatures zipping and moving around him. He ignored them like the trash they were. If they wished to save their monkey companions, then he'd allow it. He was a merciful individual, after all. As he got closer, he finally spoke. Kaguya-chan, come out and play. There was silence for several seconds as the pale-skinned man stood near the edge of the gigantic crater he had created. Annoyance seeped into his veins as Kaguya remained silent, all but ignoring him as she focused on whatever it was down there. TCH. He'd show her what happens when you ignore him. The man began to spin his fish hook at a rapid pace, practically eviscerating the surroundings with the wind currents he was generating. A moment later he proceeded to launch the hook towards Kaguya, intent on spearing her through the throat so he could drag her to him. An explosion resonated shortly after from where he had thrown his hook. An arrogant smirk formed on his face before he proceeded to yank his chakra hook. His eyes widened in surprise when he found that instead of dragging Kaguya to him, he was currently being dragged. It happened so fast that the man had all but half a second to brace for impact. His face soon became intimate with the ground, creating an earthquake that spanned several miles out into the village. He had felt that hurt. Why did that hurt? Kaguya's face showed none of the anger and rage she felt. Her eyes were blank as she stared down at Ino. Dare she call the buxom woman her friend, was taking shallow breaths as she lay on the ground, clutching her lower abdomen. Shielding Ino had ultimately saved her life, but the 3 foot of rebar that was puncturing her stomach would see that she wouldn't. Kaguya knelt down beside Ino before slashing the upper rebar that was currently piercing through Ino's body. The comatose woman released a whimper of pain and it only fueled Kaguya's anger. Her hands trembled for a moment before she forced them to cease. No, she couldn't afford to be angry right now. She needed to be calm and level-headed. A mistake here would see Ino dying. It took longer than Kaguya would have liked, but she eventually managed to pull Ino off of the rebar. She was quick to staunch the woman's bleeding, placing a palm to her bleeding stomach and pulsing her chakra through the woman's body. Easy. Not too much or you'll kill it. Naruto's gentle reminder replayed in her head. You need to be fully concentrated. You have perfect chakra control. All you need to do is direct it, Haim. Kaguya allowed her mind to still as she set to work on healing Ino. It took less than 10 seconds before the color upon Ino's skin began to even out. Sweat cascaded down her body, mixed with blood and dirt. But she'd be fine. She'd be okay. Kaguya-chan, come out and play. A wave of white, hot anger surged through her body at the familiar man's voice. A man that she had feared when she was younger. A man she hated with her entire being. Urashiki. Kaguya's blank orbs seemed almost dead to the world as she stared at Ino's body. Placing a palm upon the woman's body, Kaguya created a portal to transport the woman away. It swallowed the blonde woman a second later before disappearing from reality. The goddess slowly rose to her feet, ignoring the blood of her friend that stained her pristine white robes. A cloud of rage threatened to overcome her, and it was only held back by the knowledge that should she let loose, Konoha would become nothing more than a barren wasteland. No, absolutely not. She wouldn't stoop to his level. Kaguya sensed the attack before it even happened. That translucent hook of chakra raced through the air, creating shockwaves of power as it split the air. The horned goddess merely tilted her head, ignoring the hook as it shot past her, missing its intended target by less than an inch. Kaguya snatched the string a second later, wrapping it around her wrist in a fluid motion. She felt the tug and was minutely impressed with how strong Urashiki had become. He almost managed to pull her towards him. Almost. With nary a look, Kaguya yanked on the thread, forcing Urashiki to come to her. Not expecting the difference in strength, her cousin rocketed from his position atop the crater. With hollow eyes, Kaguya proceeded to swing Urashiki through the air before slamming him directly into the earth, causing an earthquake that detonated the rubble and debris. The impact caused the village to shake violently, screaming at the display of strength. There was several moments of silence that followed Kaguya's actions. She had just humiliated the man with her brief action. Considering he'd yet to react, she'd assumed that he thought she was weak. Nothing but trash under his boot. Kaguya pitied the man. He'd die in vain just like his brother. She'd see to it, but for now, she was going to take her time. Pick him apart. Enrage him. Rupture his insanity, and only then would she kill him. He deserved nothing less, after all. But he was finally starting to stir, wasn't he? Best to nip that in the bud. Kaguya didn't so much as move as she did blur. To the observing eye, all that followed was a vicious shockwave that produced a cyclone of wind. Kaguya reveled in the pain-filled grunt that escaped from Arashiki as she kicked him straight through the Hokage monument. His body cannoned through the mile-high mountain, decimating the landform before being ejected through the other side of it. Good. He was far away enough away that the village wouldn't be in danger. She could let loose now. Before disappearing in a portal, she spotted the crumbling mountain that possessed the previous leaders of Konoha. The only carved face that had remained from her kick was that of Tsunade's face, Naruto's surrogate mother. Kaguya stared at the woman's face for a moment before nodding her head in satisfaction and disappearing in the portal. The woman slowly stepped out of the portal, coming just a few feet in front of a prone Arashiki. The man was currently coughing harshly, slowly rising to his knees while breathing shallowly. Arashiki exhaled harshly, wiping the drool that fell from his mouth. You'll pay for that, wretch. Kaguya merely tilted her head at the exclamation before slowly raising her left knee. Her arms and hands slowly crossed her body, setting in fighting stance that Arashiki didn't recognize. The woman's right palm was centered away from her body whilst her left hand was clenched near her hip. The woman's left leg carved a trench through the soil, creating a half-circle groove before lining up with her right foot. The goddess rested her weight on her right leg before staring at Arashiki with a blank expression. Arashiki stared at his cousin in disgust. What manner of combat is this? You sully our tradition with such inferior methods. A sneer etched itself upon Arashiki's face before he laughed. Fine, I will indulge you, little rabbit. I will enjoy crushing you. Arashiki settled in a stance that Kaguya recognized all too well. She and her sister had been on the receiving end of Arashiki's ferocious fighting style for years. He'd beat them into the ground, bloodied and bruised, and would spit on them when finished. She was going to enjoy breaking him. Arashiki blurred towards her, right palm shooting towards her throat. Kaguya's expression never changed as she weaved her palm around his attack before gripping his forearm. She took a step toward Arashiki, hooking her foot around his ankle and rotating her hips. Kaguya's left heel dug deep into the soil as she lashed out with the hand that had gripped Arashiki's first attack. Arashiki's eyes widened at the speed, and before he could brace for the attack, Kaguya's palm impacted against his chest. Spittle and blood ejected through Arashiki's mouth as he was sent tumbling through the rubble. The man flipped once, twice, thrice. He kept going before ultimately slamming into a large boulder, halting his momentum. A vicious tremor rocked his body as he slowly rose to his feet. His chest had been physically caved in by the woman's blow. Where had this monstrous strength come from? Kaguya was never this physically powerful. Arashiki was unable to continue his train of thought when Kaguya suddenly appeared in front of him. His eyes widened upon sensing and seeing the translucent chakra that surrounded the woman's hands. The Otsutsuki desperately crossed his arms against his body, bracing for the blow that was sure to come. Hake Sojishi Hogeki. Kaguya spoke quietly. Immediately after her words, the translucent chakra in her palms shone a brilliant purple before taking the shape of two ferocious lions. Arashiki had little time to study the technique before being rocketed through the earth due to the strength of the technique. Another ejection of blood and spit escaped from his orifice as Kaguya battered his arms. The Otsutsuki clawed his way out of the crater he'd been subjected to before growling angrily. What was happening? How was this wretch overpowering him? She shouldn't be this. Arashiki's train of thought was ended as his face was caved in from Kaguya's attack. Several teeth ejected from Arashiki's mouth as he was nearly sent airborne. Kaguya decided against that. Before he could rise, the woman flashed behind him in a twirl. Her body spun as she chambered her leg before kicking the man back into the earth. A vicious earthquake rocked the foundation as Arashiki was sent through several dozen meters of rock and soil. Kaguya landed with nary a sound. Her head tilted before she began to skip backwards, dodging the various chakra blasts from Arashiki. The woman twirled, flipped and displayed an impressive amount of flexibility and acrobatics as she dodged Arashiki's attacks. She landed nimbly before planting her feet and chambering her fist. A second passed by before the glowing lion in her right hand roared. The goddess struck the earth beneath her, reducing the entire terrain to nothing more than sand. An earthquake of massive proportions shook the earth as Arashiki was forced to flee. He made it all of 3 steps before being forced to dodge Kaguya's lethal onslaught. Left fist, right palm, left jab, right hook, straight, cross, jab. What manner of combat was this? This wasn't the style Kaguya used. Arashiki seldom recognized the form and strikes. Arashiki parried a blow meant to attack his temple. A savage grin spread across his face as he noticed how open the woman left herself. He made to capitalize on it before an excruciating amount of pain rocked his jaw, breaking it entirely. A feint. How? Arashiki screamed angrily before his vision blacked once more, the telltale sign of being buried under several tons of soil and earth. Why was she so strong? It didn't make sense. She should be weak, pitiful, groveling at his feet, but she was forcing him on the defensive. Unacceptable. Arashiki released a howl of anger as his chakra began to skyrocket. Breaching through the tomb of earth that had buried him, he immediately rocketed towards Kaguya's position. Kaguya did not seem to be able to react to the sheer increase of speed. She only looked on blankly as his fist inched closer to her face. It never struck true as Kaguya seemed to weave around the strike. Arashiki's eyes widened as the woman's hair seemed to come alive. Her white tresses immediately wrapped around his fist, preventing him from pulling away and retreating. He had all but a second to glimpse into her eyes before those glowing purple lions struck his abdomen. Arashiki vomited a healthy amount of blood, painting the lower portion of Kaguya's face. Another wheeze of pain escaped Arashiki as Kaguya continued to assault his body. Shockwave after shockwave detonated along his body as the woman's fists blurred. His body would shoot backwards only for the woman's hair to snatch him back, opening him up for even more brutal attacks. Left, right, 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 left, right. Kaguya's blank expression slowly began to crack as she struck Arashiki's mangled body. A demented smile formed on her face, made all the more terrifying due to the blood painting her face. It seeped into her own mouth, painting her own teeth a vicious shade of scarlet. The woman didn't care. Kaguya reared her right fist back as far as she could before channeling a disgusting amount of chakra into her fist. The purple lion on her fist bellied a roar before shifting into another creature and growing larger and larger. What could only be described as an eldritch abomination sat atop Kaguya's right fist. Its maw was mangled, jaw uneven and filled with serrated and crooked teeth. It lacked an eye with no nose and was the darkest shade of black with spikes protruding from random areas of its head. The howl it released chilled Arashiki to his bones as he stared at the chakra abomination. The sheer power radiating from the monster would surely kill him. I hope you survive this, Arashiki. Kaguya spoke quietly, with wide eyes full of manic glee. It won't be fun if you die so quickly. The woman released a maniacal laugh before shoving her fist through Arashiki. The explosion was glorious. The eldritch beast all but shredded Arashiki to his bones. His screams of agony was like music to Kaguya's ears. It was made all the more better as he was forced to heal over and over again. His flesh continued to be stripped before Kaguya released her hold on him, allowing the man to detonate against the mountains. The horned Otsutsuki obliterated the terrain and mountainside before being engulfed in a dome of black chakra. Not a second later did the dome of chakra explode, prolonging the man's suffering. Silence pervaded the destroyed landscape for several minutes as Kaguya languidly made her way towards Arashiki. Blood dripped down her face and painted her robes, but she cared little for it. The smoke and ash had long since disappeared, leaving only destruction in its wake. She felt it before it happened. Kaguya's eyebrows furrowed at the egregious amount of chakra resonating from Arashiki's position. He wouldn't have, would he? The rabbit goddess blurred towards Arashiki's position. Upon reaching the man, her eyes briefly widened upon noticing the transformation her cousin had gone through. Gone were the pale white orbs that resembled her own. In their place was 2 golden orbs with a golden rinnegan on his forehead. His nails had transformed, becoming elongated talons similar to the avian creature his horn resembled. Black asymmetrical markings covered his face and legs. The man's grayish-blue hair became snow-white, not unlike her own, and spread out behind him in a wild manner. The horn stop his head jutted out from his head, resembling flared wings. Witness true horror. Urashiki sneered hatefully. The transformed Otsutsuki blurred out of sight, causing Kagaya's eyes to widen. The woman immediately ducked, dodging the blow that would have surely decapitated her. The goddess grit her teeth before being forced to on the defensive. Urashiki's fists blurred, producing shockwaves while upending and decimating the surrounding terrain. Kagaya weaved left, right before being struck directly in the stomach by the man. The woman was folded directly over the man's fist before being ejected like a rocket through the landscape. Her body skipped through the terrain, flipping and skipping through the soil like a skipped stone atop water. Urashiki watched the woman's broken body finally come to a stop as she was buried beneath a mountain. Serves the bitch right. To think that she could even hope to match him was her own lunacy. Get up, Kagaya-chan. We're only getting started, you little wretch. Urashiki taunted before appearing in a flash directly above the woman. A disgusting orb of purple and black chakra pulsated in his hands as he hovered over the prone woman. With a cruel smile, Urashiki raised the orb above his head. I hope you don't die from this, Kagaya-chan. It'd be a shame to kill you so soon. He mocked her previous words before rearing his arm back and throwing the orb at her body. It detonated a nanosecond later, causing the world itself to scream in agony at the sheer display of power. A blinding white light spanned out several miles wide, blinding anything and everything while eviscerating everything. Organic or non-organic didn't matter. The orb swallowed everything it could. Similar to Kagaya's actions, Urashiki seemed content with gazing upon his surroundings, taking pride in the destruction he caused with his ability. Ho! He spoke curiously. You're alive. A cruel smile formed on his face as he seemed to teleport towards the woman. Urashiki stood several feet away from Kagaya, watching as the woman struggled to even rise to her knees. Blood pooled along her broken body as her wounds refused to heal. He now knew why she was struggling to rise as he spotted the remains of her left leg. Her left leg had been severed at the thigh with several burns encasing her body. Her once long and beautiful hair was now reduced to little more than frayed yarn, burned and dead. Urashiki grinned to himself as he slowly strode towards the woman's position, laughing loudly as Kagaya struggled to her feet, her foot. I'll admit, you put up a decent fight. The transformed Otsutsuki praised. But in the end, you were as impressive as you'd always been. Weak trash that deserves no place among the main family. As Urashiki mocked Kagaya, he proceeded to place his talon-like foot atop the woman's head before slamming her skull into the ground, nearly splitting her skull in two. I'm going to enjoy dismembering you. And when I'm done, I'm going to force you to watch as I do the same to that blonde monkey you seem to love. That seemed to get a reaction out of the broken woman. Her left hand, mangled as it was and missing 3 fingers, gripped onto Urashiki's ankle with frightening strength despite her nearly defeated state. Urashiki glanced down at the broken and beaten woman, watching as her body shook and trembled. An ugly sneer formed on his face as his other foot rose before descending on the woman's skull once more, burying her further into the earth. Don't like that, do ya? What are going to do about it, Kagaya-chan? The man continued to smash the woman's face against the earth, forcing her to let go of his ankle. Trash! The transformed Otsutsuki raged, rearing his right foot back before kicking Kagaya directly in the ribs, forcefully making her release his ankle. She skipped along the terrain before crashing into a boulder with her back indenting it. Urashiki reappeared directly in front of her with his fist reared back. I'm going to enjoy causing the blonde monkey to suffer. And I'll make sure you're sane enough to watch. Urashiki proceeded to strike the woman's stomach. Urashiki's fist neared her stomach before being forcefully stopped. A clawed hand gripped his wrist painfully and Urashiki's sneer only grew more anger as he realized whose hand was stopping him. Ill you. Urashiki's fist trembled in the woman's grasp as he responded. Speak up, you whore. Kagaya's head abruptly rose, revealing her missing Byakugan. In their place were only empty sockets with dried blood falling down her cheeks. Urashiki's eyes widened at the sight and before he could kill the woman, her jaw seemed to snap shut and an explosion of power followed, knocking Urashiki away from the mangled woman. His transformed body skipped along the terrain before he abruptly righted himself in air, landing atop his clawed feet. Urashiki stared at the smoke that had been kicked up from Kagaya's transformation with wide eyes. How had Kagaya known about the transformation? Who had told her? A hint of fear spread throughout his body as the woman's shadow began to surface through the cloud of smoke. Her long hair seemed to billow behind her as she took slow, measured steps. Abruptly, the woman stopped moving before raising her hand and making a slashing gesture through the smoke. Urashiki's eyes widened exponentially as a wave of pain shot through his body emanating from the left side of his body. His golden eyes followed the source and his eyes only grew larger. His arm. Where was his arm? Witness true horror. Kaguya's mocking voice echoed loudly. The woman finally deigned to reveal herself. Gone was the ceremonial robe that covered her entire body. In its place was a skin-tight black covering that seemed to cover her chest and upper thighs, practically molding against her skin with no discernible design or flair. The woman's eyes were a brilliant shade of golden along with the third eye that rested upon her forehead. The only markings that covered her body stemmed from her eyes, resembling tear stains. The marks continued down her body before briefly disappearing under the black covering atop her chest. It then seemed to shoot her to stretch along her arms and legs. Her previous horns were now larger and thicker and seemed to twist once before curving backwards, similar to a ram's horns. Her previous long, straight hair now curled behind her back, tied in what appeared to be a loose ponytail. The length, however, remained the same. Kaguya's smile was wicked as she bent her knees before raising her arms high above her head and slowly twirling them to create a circle in front of her chest. Her hands seemed to move in slow motion, and before Urashiki could comprehend what had happened to him, his head was severed from his body. It all seemed to happen at once. He glimpsed something brilliant and golden that stood behind Kaguya. It towered over her, shimmering in and out of focus, like some ethereal protector that wished to remain hidden. Urashiki couldn't understand why his vision was currently flipped upside down. Why was he staring up at his own legs? What had happened? What was going? Oh. That's not fair. A clawed foot stomped on the severed head, completely obliterating it whilst causing a cascade of blood to rain from the sky. Good riddance, oh cousin of mine. Kaguya sneered hatefully. I will see you in hell, mongrel. And, sup. Yeah, I know. An update. From me. Crazy right. Yeah, I got nothing. I got hit with mega inspiration to write this while I was working a few days ago and practically wrote all of this in a single night. I'm not sure if I'm gonna officially end this story here, but we'll see. I enjoyed writing for this one again. Chapter 4, Satsushiki Otsutsuki. Euphoria was a feeling that Kaguya seldom felt in her life. She could physically count each experience on one hand, so infrequent were they. But basking in the blood of one of childhood tormentors. It was a feeling she couldn't hope to explain. Euphoric was the only thing that could come close. Golden, ringed eyes strayed towards the sky, staring at the darkened clouds as crimson raindrops pelted her face. Her snowy hair began to darken with Urashiki's life essence, but she cared little for it. She had done it. Urashiki had died. Her sister had been avenged. Kaguya bowed her head, closing her eyes and allowing a moment of silence to pass for her departed sister. As the crimson raindrops tapered off, the transformed goddess made her way towards Urashiki's corpse. The woman's tongue darted past her lips, eyes flashing with hidden desire as she stared at his body. Her tongue encircled her lips, lapping up the dried blood of her deceased relative. Kaguya kneeled next to the body, placing her hands atop Urashiki's torso before tearing out a chunk of his flesh with her hands. Her clawed fingers made quick work of his body as she gorged herself with his flesh. Crimson liquid stained the goddess's face and hands as she ripped apart the decomposing body, meticulously tearing apart and devouring Urashiki. Bones snapped and cracked as her teeth gnawed against the condensed anatomy. Crimson essence seeped down her mouth, dropping off her chin and splashing against the terrain. A pleased hum escaped the goddess's lips as she smacked her lips, ripping apart Urashiki's body with ease. Her hums got increasingly louder the more she ate, tapering off into quiet moans of enjoyment. For the next several minutes, the goddess gorged herself with the flesh of another Otsutsuki, uncaring about her surroundings. Her teeth snapped and chomped, breaking down bone and cartilage with little issue until there was nothing left of Urashiki's body. With a pleased hum, Kaguya proceeded to wipe her face with her forearm, smearing the blood along her face. She slowly, and deliberately, licked each of her fingers clean, making sure to savor the taste of her deceased cousin. That was incredibly disturbing. Kaguya's head snapped backwards, golden eyes flashing at the voice. Her chakra flared. Violently. The earth shook as she physically willed her power to manifest. A golden flash emanated to life behind her, towering over her form like some ethereal god. Its form was indecipherable, flickering in and out of existence as if it didn't truly belong in this world. The intruder took half a step back, staring at the ethereal creature with widened eyes. Sasuke's Rinnegan flared in response to his shock, unable to comprehend what exactly he was witnessing. And then it seemed to just vanish, disappearing into the nether as if never having existed. Upon noticing who had spoken, Kaguya reined in her chakra, subsequently recalling the ethereal being back into her body. With blood painting her face, she spoke calmly, unnerving the man who had snuck up on her. "Enjoy the show?" she asked in a mocking tone, slowly standing to her feet. "You are looking quite unwell." Sasuke stared at his best friend's lover for a moment before shaking his head. "I will be fine." He ignored the dull throbbing surrounding his Rinnegan before continuing. "We dealt with the other one." Those unique Rinnegan she sported flashed with curiosity. "Oh, do tell." A small smirk painted her crimson-stained face. "Did they suffer?" Kaguya was different. Whatever happened to her changed her. Sasuke couldn't even sense her chakra. It was like she had none. Which didn't make any sense considering she had flared it when he spoke, summoning that thing. That's not mentioning the fact that she had quite literally consumed the dead body of whatever Otsutsuki she had fought. Is that how Otsutsuki truly got their power? Sasuke no longer wished to entertain the issue. His name was Ashiki. He paused for a moment as the woman's golden Rinnegan flared with power. "I take it you knew him." The transformed goddess scoffed quietly to herself, staring in a random direction. No, not a random direction. She was staring in the direction that Naruto was at. Yes, she dragged the word out for a moment. "My wretched uncle." She paused for a moment before tilting her head. "Is his body still intact?" Sasuke frowned for a moment before responding. "Yes." "Beautiful." Sasuke blinked and the woman quite literally vanished before his eyes. His eyes widened at the sheer increase in speed before darting off to follow after her. The Uchiha had a nagging feeling that something bad was going to happen. Perhaps he was just worrying over nothing, but something told him that this transformation was going to cause issues. Naruto huffed quietly, sweat dripping down his face as he stared at the corpse of the Otsutsuki he and Sasuke had killed. A quiet sigh escaped his lips as he wiped the bottom of his lip, tasting copper as he did so. What an annoying fight. The Otsutsuki had possessed the ability to shrink anything and quickly restore it to its original size. A rather simple ability at first glance, but the man had used it to his advantage with lethal precision. His cerulean orbs strayed towards his abdomen, spotting the now healed injury to his stomach. During their bout, he had felt a tiny prick on his stomach. The second he blinked, his stomach had quite literally ruptured, being speared through by a large rod of chakra similar to his Gudodama. He had been caught off guard multiple times due to this ability and it had nearly cost Sasuke his Rinnegan. It was only due to his usage of the Hiraishin that had saved Sasuke from losing his eye. The fact that Ashiki could react to the Hiraishin was another annoying part of the fight. Naruto was not a prideful individual. He was very powerful, he knew, but for someone to be purely blessed with power they didn't earn and match him and be able to overwhelm him to a certain degree, left a sour taste in his mouth. There is always someone stronger out there, Naruto. Naruto's lip curled in annoyance as he stared at the corpse of the Otsutsuki. "I know Kurama. Doesn't change the fact that it's annoying. I struggled for this power. The world doesn't care about your struggles, partner." Naruto acquiesced to his Biju's words. Still didn't change the fact that it left him bitter. He sensed her before she even appeared. Cerulean orbs snapped to the left, spotting his. Naruto stared at his newly transformed wife with wide eyes. His eyes roamed up and down her body, taking in all the changes. His mouth slowly opened before closing in the same motion, admiring her new look. "Heim." He furrowed his brows as the pale-skinned woman glanced his way with a smirk. "You look different. In a good way, of course." Golden Rinnegan stared back at him as the woman offered a glance to the dead body a few feet away from her husband. "Did he suffer?" Kaguya asked with a smile, slowly making her way towards her blonde lover. Her hips swayed in an exaggerated manner and she relished the look in her husband's eyes. Naruto glanced at the dead Otsutsuki for a moment before shrugging his shoulders and leaning his head against the rock he sat in front of. I hope so. His eyes trailed back towards her, eyeing the copious amount of blood on her body. Are you hurt? The woman's smile was all teeth as she stopped a foot away from her lover. It does not belong to me. Naruto acknowledged how different his wife was acting but chalked it up to the odd transformation she had gone through. Unlike Sasuke, Naruto was aware of the many transformations that the Otsutsuki could go through when consuming each other and/or the Shinju. He felt a weight settle on his lap and opened his eyes to see his wife taking residence on his pelvis. He raised a curious brow, staring into those unique Rinnegan of hers. Need something, Haim. A sinful grin split across her features as she placed her claw-like fingers atop Naruto's shoulders. I need you. The woman's blood-stained lips grazed his own as she growled huskily. Why don't you relieve yourself of these garments, hem? Naruto's hands gripped the woman's waist, preventing her from rolling her hips. Where did my meek wife go? Just the other week you were blushing at the thought of doing something in the open. A cheeky grin followed his statement as his wife made displeased noises. Do not test my patience, beloved. With strength that took Naruto by surprise, Kaguya swiped away his hands, freeing herself with ease. Her long tresses of hair slowly uncurled, moving on their own before ensnaring Naruto's wrists, trapping him like he had done to her. Kinky. Naruto muttered with a large grin, trying and failing, at breaking the hold his wife had on him. Whatcha gonna do to me, Haim? Kaguya's tongue through her lips, trailing along her husband's cheek as she leaned over him, grinding her pelvis against his. Whatever I desire. Your breath smells like blood. Naruto noted quietly, ignoring the pleasure emanating from his wife's ministrations. Cease thy complaints, beloved. Her lips grazed his own, teeth nipping his bottom lip as she stroked his chest with her claws. A little blood only makes it better, no. Her claws accentuated her statement, biting into his skin and drawing a small amount of blood. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki flexed his muscles, actually trying to break the restraints but failing to do so. His eyebrows furrowed at the increase in strength from his wife. Geez, you're a lot stronger now. A particularly slow roll of her hips caused him to release a low groan. Kaguya purred lowly, nipping at the man's neck. How does it feel, beloved? To be the weak one now. One of her hands stroked down his chest, passing his abdomen before resting against his waist. Cerulean eyes flicked downward, watching the woman's claw-like fingers dance on the hem of his pants. Oddly satisfying. A cheeky smile painted his features as his wife's hand dove beneath his pants. A low grunt escaped his lips as she began to slowly stroke him, making pleased hums as she licked and nipped at his neck. You two have no shame. Sasuke's voice interrupted, making himself known. Kaguya released an annoyed growl before flicking her absent hand towards Sasuke's direction, conjuring a portal beneath him and forcing him through it. Annoying pest. Naruto released a guffaw of laughter at his wife's actions, only to then release a quiet hiss of pleasure as she continued to stroke him. Come now, beloved. She spoke huskily, golden eyes staring down into his. Let us make love. She leaned her head down, lips grazing his ear lobe as she whispered. Fill me with your seed. I wish to bear your child. Naruto needn't be convinced further. Cerulean orbs stared down at the stack of folders and documents with a bored tint. Meaningless dribble and overly complicated text covered the entire stack of papers. Why use such ridiculous words to describe such simple things? Who even wrote this? He was a shinobi, not a damn thesaurus. Words didn't need to be longer than 4 syllables. Naruto was convinced that Sasuke was behind it. That annoying prick would do just about anything to cause a headache these days. It's not his fault the one-eyed didn't look good at 40. He himself was blessed with the genetics of the Uzumaki. Even at 60 years old he'd not look a day over 35. He couldn't wait to rub it in his old friend's face when that time came. You're not doing your work. A lazy drawl spoke from his side. Stop being lazy. The distinct smell of cigarettes entered his nostrils and Naruto restrained himself from launching a futon jutsu at the man. Shika. Naruto spoke lazily, eyes tracing but not really reading the document in front of him. Put that cigarette out or I'm going to send you through the window. He'd do it too. It wouldn't be the first time he had done so. Temari approved of his actions, so all the more reason to continue doing so. The Nara muttered beneath his breath but eventually acquiesced to his leader's demand. The bastard had sent him through the window several times before and Shikamaru didn't necessarily fancy being sent halfway across the village today. Maybe another day. But not today. If you actually did your work then I wouldn't feel the need to pop a smoke. Shikamaru rolled his eyes lazily, leaning against the window of the office. We've been here 3 hours longer than necessary. What's keeping ya? Naruto blinked at his old friend's words, furrowing his eyebrows in confusion. What do you mean? He turned his head towards Shikamaru, eyes widening as he noticed how dark it was outside. Oh shit. Shikamaru raised an eyebrow with a smirk. Kaguya's gonna kill you. With a speed that Shikamaru had long since grown accustomed to, Naruto blazed through the paperwork. Documents, folders, papers, stamps of approval. They were filled out, correctly and precisely with little issue. The Nara shook his head with a rueful grin, watching as Naruto began to tidy up his office to return home. Ya know, if you just took your work seriously then you wouldn't be constantly put in this position. Naruto grunted in annoyance, swiping up various documents and placing them in different cabinet drawers. Give me a break, Shika. I've quite literally saved the world at least 6 times now. Heroes don't get a day off. The Nara quipped with a small smile. Don't call me that, Naruto warned with a roll of the eyes. I'm not 17 anymore. I'm past my prime at this point. Shikamaru rolled his eyes, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a carton of cigarettes. He placed one of the nicotine sticks in his mouth but refrained from lighting it. Keep telling yourself that. We both know it isn't true. The Hokage finally finished his work, placing all the documents where they needed to be before replying to his trusted advisor. Oh, I know. I just like to be humble. Humble is certainly a word. Shikamaru replied easily. I wouldn't particularly use that to describe you but that's my own personal opinion. Giyu Zabuto Bethroun throw to window say what? The blonde shinobi questioned in a rapid tone. What? Shikamaru questioned impulsively. It took only a single second for the question to actually register. Oh, phew. See ya tomorrow, Shika. Naruto yelled, waving towards the direction he had threw Shikamaru in. His eyes roamed along the now broken window in his office before ultimately shrugging. I'll fix it tomorrow. The Hokage proceeded to then disappear from the office, vanishing in a golden flash. Naruto reappeared in front of the door to his home. He took a calming breath before placing his palm on the object. He pulsed his chakra, unlocking the door and stepping through it. A delicious aroma immediately assaulted him, causing his eyebrows to furrow as he traveled further into the house. That was odd. He was late. Kaguya was meticulous when it came to home life. She prepared dinner at the same time every day, without fault. The fact he could smell what seemed like fresh food surprised him. He stretched his senses out into the house, locking onto 2 signatures within his home. A small smile blossomed on his face as he slowly, and quietly, traversed his way towards the kitchen. As he inched closer to the kitchen he heard 2 distinct voices, both with feminine undertones. Peeking his head into the room, Naruto's smile softened at the scene. His beautiful wife, whose transformation had been permanent, was kneeling, speaking softly to a young child. Be mindful of the instrument you wield, Satsu-chan. Kaguya spoke softly with a smile. It is not the weapon that is dangerous. She pointed towards the pale-skinned child, pressing her fingertip against the little girl's chest. It is the one who wields it that is dangerous. The pale-skinned girl known as Satsu nodded her head. I understand, Mama. Naruto's eyes softened as he stared at Satsushiki. Kaguya had chosen her name, all but demanding that she be named after her younger sister who had long since perished. Naruto hadn't bothered putting up a fight with the woman. How could he? So long as his wife was happy then he was happy. Little Satsushiki was practically a carbon copy of Kaguya before her original consumption of the Shinju. She held little of his actual features, save for the whisker marks on her cheeks and her slanted eyes. The girl's long hair was the same snowy white as his wife's. Her hair fell down her back, nearly kissing the floor with its length. She possessed tiny bangs that fell beneath her chin, similar in manner to the bangs that his own father had possessed. Atop her head was a tiny pair of horns that lacked a distinctive trait to them. Satsushiki wore a similar ceremonial robe to the one that Kaguya had originally worn before her new transformation. The only difference was the choice of color that she had chosen for it. The kicker. It was a burnt orange color, similar to the colors he had worn when he was 16 years old. Kaguya had thrown many a fits about their daughter's choice of color, but Naruto was incredibly proud. Satsushiki may be the spitting image of his wife, but she took after him when it came to her personality. She wasn't a particularly calm child, nor was she a patient one. She wasn't loud like he was, but she was certainly brash and impulsive. "Mama?" Satsushiki questioned quietly, placing her foot against the wall and climbing up it with ease to reach the counter. "When is Papa coming home?" Kaguya glanced at her child, making sure that the girl had successfully made it to the counter before replying. "Your father is a very busy man, Satsu-chan." Their daughter was too young to catch it, but Naruto could easily sense the agitation and frustration in her tone. He grimaced at his wife's words, sighing quietly to himself. Satsushiki frowned at her mother's words, falling to her knees and scraping the knife in her hands on the cutting board that Kaguya was using. "Papa is always busy. Why is he never home? He must hate us." His daughter's words stabbed into his heart, causing his face to twist painfully. Kaguya immediately reprimanded her daughter. "Do not speak ill of your father, Satsushiki," she demanded harshly, staring into the girl's snowy eyes. She dropped the knife in her hand, firmly gripping her daughter's chin to make sure the girl was listening. "Your father would sacrifice the very world itself if it meant that you were safe and sound. Do not sully his name where he can hear you." Kaguya's eyes snapped towards Naruto's direction for a moment, spotting his twisted expression. She pursed her lips for a moment before returning her gaze to their daughter. "Naruto adores you more than life itself, Satsushiki." Tears coalesced in the little girl's eyes as she sniffled. When she spoke, her voice was low and soft. "Sometimes. It doesn't feel like it." Kaguya's eyes softened at the girl's words. She released her hold upon the girl's chin, gingerly stroking her daughter's cheeks. "Then why to remain silent? He cannot read your mind, daughter. Your father would do everything in his power to make you happy." Satsushiki sniffed once, tiny hands coming up to her face to wipe away the tears. "I do not wish to bother him," she mumbled quietly, eyes falling to the cutting board below her. "Everyone says that Papa is a busy man. The other kids even make fun of me for it. It isn't fair. Why does Papa have to be the Hokage? Tell someone else to be the leader." Kaguya sighed quietly as she stroked her daughter's cheeks. "It is not that simple, daughter." Little Satsu balled her fists in anger. Her chakra surged dangerously, shaking the foundation of the home. Golden specks of chakra wafted off her body as she responded. "That's what everyone says. Who cares about that stupid hat? I just want my papa. It isn't fair that everyone else gets to spend time with their papas but won't let me spend time with mine. I hate it." Tears of frustration and anger fell from his daughter's face, splashing against the countertop. "Why does the village come first, Mama?" A sad smile graced Kaguya's features as she allowed Satsushiki to express her anger and frustration. "It was your father's dream to lead this village when he was your age. I cannot hope to understand why your father does what he does. It is not my place, Satsushiki, nor is it yours. These are things we must accept." Satsushiki sniffled once more as she replied quietly. "I don't like it." Kaguya shook her head with a soft sigh, pulling the girl towards her bosom while ignoring the tiny horns on her head. "It is fine to dislike it. I cannot control the emotions you possess, but you must accept it. Your father is a gentle man. He is not like us. You cannot condemn him for the same things your peers condemn you for." The rabbit goddess paused for a moment, stroking her daughter's hair. "Let this be a lesson to you, the first of many. There will be times in life that are trying, arduous and painful. But, you must never give in to them. You must continue forward, never stopping whilst maintaining strength. It is only when you have stood in the pits of despair that you can witness the beauty of the sun, my dear daughter." Little Satsushiki wiped the tears from her face with a quiet sniffle. "I understand, Mama." Kaguya smiled as she stroked her daughter's head once more. She turned her gaze back towards Naruto, frowning upon noticing his absence. A tired sigh escaped her lips as she returned her gaze back to her daughter. She tucked the emotions back into her chest, composing herself with ease before speaking. "Come, Satsu-chan, let us finish preparations. Your father will be returning from work soon." Despite the girl's reddened eyes, she perked up at the mention of her father. "Hi, Mama." The goddess pulled away from the girl, eyes returning to the spot that Naruto had disappeared from. She stared at the area for a moment before shaking her head with a sad sigh. Kaguya hoped that Naruto would take this experience as a lesson as well. She did not fault the man for his feelings regarding Konoha and the elemental nations. Naruto was his own man who truly owed her no obligations. Yes, they were husband and wife, but she knew Naruto. His first love would always be to the village he grew up in. The very same village that had spited him from birth. But Naruto would, one day, have to choose between his family and the village. He sired a daughter, of flesh and blood. He now possessed an obligation that could not be ignored. Satsushiki deserved his love just as much as this village did, if not even more so. Kaguya would not idly stand by and allow his ambition and dreams to overshadow the child he created. Dinner was a silent affair. Naruto entered with a strained smile, greeting her with love in his eyes. When his eyes set on his daughter, his expression twisted. Not of resentment or dislike but of regret and sadness. Kaguya was easily able to decipher his emotions. Naruto had always worn his emotions on his sleeve. He was an open book that could not be closed. Their daughter, as young as she was, did not notice the look and was just happy that her father was here. Naruto usually spoke enough for the both of them, but tonight, it was quiet. Satsushiki hadn't really noticed, being the oblivious child that she was. When dinner had finished, Kaguya took their daughter aside, taking her to the bathroom to clean her up and prepare her for bed. The little girl had complained, wishing to spend more time with her father. The goddess took one look at Naruto, whose eyes stared down at his half-finished dinner with disgust and frustration. She shook her head before forcing Satsushiki out of the room, coercing her with the knowledge that Naruto would lay her down to sleep. It took less than an hour to get Satsushiki ready for bed. Her eyes had glowed with joy and happiness as Naruto slinked his way through her room, offering her a short story of his past before bidding her good night with a soft kiss. Kaguya's eyes remained closed as she sensed Naruto bounding his way down the stairs. Her hands scrubbed at the dirty plates from dinner, meticulously scrubbing them clean. Her husband slowly made his way towards her, wordlessly standing beside her and aiding her in cleaning the dirty dishes. No words were spoken for the first few minutes, just the idle noise of the faucet running and water splashing. Kaguya side-eyed her husband, taking note of his distant expression. She sighed quietly before turning the faucet off and speaking. "She loves you. You understand this, yes?" The blond man blinked at the question, glancing towards his wife as he leaned against the counter. Yeah, I know." Kaguya wiped her hands dry with a spare towel, crossing her arms against her. "Then what avails you? You will not sulk before me, I shall not allow it." Naruto sighed quietly to himself, clashing his hands together. Her words hurt, Haim. She's entitled to her feelings, no matter how small they might seem or how trivial. It really puts into perspective how I'm seen. A delicate eyebrow rose at his words. "Do explain, husband. I can weather anything thrown at me." He explained slowly, staring down at his hands. "Toxic words from strangers, vitriolic hate from old friends and comrades about my decision to wed you. It wouldn't affect me. I didn't care about anything they had to say about my decisions regarding you, the elemental nations or any other matter regarding maintaining peace amongst the Big Five." He paused for a moment, blankly staring into the sink. "But to hear my own daughter's words on how she feels about me." He shook his head with a ragged sigh. I couldn't just ignore them. They hurt even more so because of how true they were." Kaguya saddled up beside her husband, molding her body against his and speaking. "Satsushiki is but a child, husband. Her words hold no true rancor to them. She has yet to mature and grow." Naruto shook his head at his wife's words. "Satsushiki isn't a pure-blood Otsutsuki, Haim. You can't treat her like one. She has the same emotions that all humans possess. They will always be there, ingrained into her very core." A low sigh escaped his lips as he continued. "Raising her like an Otsutsuki will only damage her psyche. She is a child, yes, but she is not like you, Haim. You cannot force her to mature with only words. She will need to form her own opinions and beliefs and be able to express her desires and dislikes without fear of being reprimanded." Kaguya's eyes narrowed at the man's words whilst her right hand peeked through his arms. She stroked his hands, leaning her head atop his shoulders. Someone has to reprimand her actions and we both know it won't be you, beloved. You cannot hope to punish her. You are much too soft on her, husband. Naruto allowed a small smile to paint his face at her words. I don't want her to grow up resenting me just because she feels a certain way about something. I never had a father, or a parent for that matter, to guide me growing up. I don't really understand what's right and wrong and what not to do. He sighed quietly as he squeezed his wife's hand. Kaguya pursed her lips for a moment before deciding to be as blunt as possible. What you are doing wrong, husband, is putting the village before your daughter. Her golden eyes hardened as the man turned his head towards her. You are a gentle man, kind to a fault. You love deeply, husband. That love spreads even to those you don't personally know. But you truly owe these people nothing. However, you have an obligation to Satsushiki. I will never come between your dream and ambition, it is not my place to do so, but you will not shoulder our child to accomplish these goals. I would sooner take our daughter and leave this planet. Her golden eyes flashed as she stared into Naruto's eyes. You owe me nothing, Naruto. But Satsushiki, she deserves everything. The woman's lips grazed his cheek, offering a chaste kiss before pulling away swiftly. You will have to choose one day, beloved. I merely pray that you choose correctly. I will not tolerate the same actions that your father did unto you. Saying her piece, the woman strutted out the kitchen, leaving Naruto to his thoughts. His eyes slowly rose to the moon, staring at the large mass of earth. The man shook his head quietly before disappearing in a golden flash. Okay class, settle down. A masked shinobi ordered to the class before him. Today's lesson will be on the importance of. Satsushiki zoned her teacher's words out after that. These mandatory lessons weren't necessary to her but required if she wished to graduate the Shinobi Academy. She was the youngest individual in this particular classroom, having skipped several grades. Father had at first protested but soon acquiesced when mother explained that she was far too advanced and skilled to remain with those younger and less experienced. The 6-year-old leaned her head against her palm, pale orbs staring out the window of the classroom. She was already Chunin level, if not on the cusp of being an outright Jonin. The only things she was lacking was experience and maturity. Papa had explained to her that Jonins were typically emotionally mature, regardless of their age. He had explained that she was rather lacking in that specific material. Which was most likely true. She was, after all, only 6 years old. She had heard of plenty of shinobi that had graduated at a young age. Those ones were typically drafted into the Anbu organization and were usually never seen again. Satsushiki highly doubted that father would allow such a thing to happen. Mother had always said that she would stand out too much for something like the Anbu. She didn't quite understand what mother had been alluding to, but as she grew older and listened to the words spoken around her, she had begun to slowly piece together the puzzle. The older generation thought they were slick with their words, but Satsushiki was different from the rest of the children her age. She had known from a young age that she wasn't normal. After all, no other child looked as she did. The only individual that even slightly resembled her was mother. And the village had plenty to say about her. Mostly negative with the various odd compliment. Those were rare but they did occasionally happen. She had learned, through word of mouth, that mother wasn't of this world. That she was a heralder of death and despair. Some kind of harbinger that only seeked famine and destruction. She had not understood their words at first, not comprehending why they viewed her mother in such a negative light. She had questioned Auntie Ino about it, but the woman had remained tight-lipped, simply saying, "It isn't my place to say." Satsushiki had always been a curious child, to a detrimental degree even. That curiosity would net her with toxic words and hate. It had been the first time she experienced anger. Those very same individuals that spewed toxicity towards her mother had met her own wrath, and it only served to further the bridge that she and her mother experienced on a daily basis. These people disliked her for something her mother had done. Satsushiki didn't like it. She couldn't accept it, rather. Why should she suffer for the actions of her mother? Regardless of whatever atrocities her mother had done, she herself did not deserve to be treated so harshly. Father had explained to her that humans were beings guided by their emotions. They would act on them, follow them, and even betray them if pushed hard enough. She hadn't much understood his words until faced with the same prejudice that he had gone through, though she knew not of it. Unlike her own father, who would push back against these people and decide to make them respect him, Satsushiki would resent them. Why should she care for those who did not like her? The only individuals she wished to please were those she considered family. Like Shikadai and Sarada-chan. They never judged her and even respected her. They didn't treat her like some useless child or a pest. It was a shame that they themselves were already jonin. She was stuck here, in this dumb, boring classroom with people she didn't really know or care about. She wanted to go on missions with Sarada and beat bad guys up. This school life was horrendously boring. Satsushiki-san. The horned child was brought out of her thoughts as the teacher spoke her name. She turned her gaze unto the teacher, raising a delicate eyebrow at his masked face. "Can you tell me why you weren't paying attention?" he asked politely, pocketing one of his hands and leaning against the chalkboard. The demi-otsutsuki blinked at the question before shifting her gaze back out the window. "This class is boring, sensei." The silver-haired teacher chuckled quietly at the girl's words. "I'm aware, little one. However, it is required for everyone, regardless of how talented you may be, to pass this class. You cannot graduate without paying attention and passing. Your father mandated it." The ease and familiarity that this man spoke in regards to her father caused her to pause. She turned her gaze back unto the man, staring at the scar that ran through his face and eye. "You speak about father so loosely. Did you know him? He's a shinobi, short stack. Of course he knows the Hokage." A random kid scoffed in annoyance. Satsushiki's eyes snapped towards the child, lip curling in annoyance. Channeling her inner Otsutsuki, she scoffed in a condescending tone. "I did not realize that I was speaking to you, Iwabani. Last I checked, I was conversing with the teacher of the class. Know when to be silent, pest. Your betters are currently speaking." The boy grit his teeth in anger and nearly screamed at the girl before being silenced with a single stare from the teacher. "Ma, children. Save the fighting for the playground." The retired Jonin offered a small smile as his eyes drifted towards the Hokage's child. "Did I know your father, you ask?" When the horned girl nodded her head, the silver-haired man chuckled quietly. "I didn't just know your father. I trained the man." Satsushiki's little eyebrows furrowed at the man's statement before her eyes widened. "You're Hitaki Kakashi." The older man merely bowed, raising his hands in a manner as if to say, "I guess so." "What gave it away? Hair color? Scar? The mask?" The Hokage's daughter narrowed her eyes as her classmates muttered to themselves quietly, not understanding what the big deal was. Imbeciles, the lot of them. They sat in the presence of greatness and didn't even realize it. They were being taught by the Hitaki Kakashi. "Mother speaks highly of you, Rokudaime-sama." Satsushiki bows her head politely, offering her own respect to the man that had managed to garner even mother's respect. There was several gasps of shock as the children reacted to the title reserved for the leaders of the village. Several exclamations reigned aloud in the classroom that had Kakashi rolling his eyes. After a minute or so of allowing the children to remain rowdy, Kakashi raised his hand to silence the room. His charcoal eyes found Satsushiki's as he spoke. "I'm honored that the famous Kaguya thinks so highly of me." The pale-skinned girl nodded her head as she continued. "She says without you, that father would have been a bumbling idiot, grasping for straws to breathe through muddied water." Kakashi chuckled lightly at the girl's words. "That certainly sounds like something she would say." Before the demi-otsutsuki could respond, a familiar voice resounded out in the room. "Now, that's just rude. Speaking behind my back, Kakai-sensei." Satsushiki's eyes widened at the sound of her father's voice. Her head twisted behind her, spotting the man directly behind her, sporting a cheeky smile. The classroom erupted into chaos as the children jumped for joy for the Hokage, spouting how amazing and cool it was that two Hokages were in the same room. After a few minutes of chaos, one that Kakashi and Naruto allowed freely, the masked man finally responded to his former student. "Dread the thought of speaking about you, Naruto." Naruto rolled his eyes playfully, scoffing to himself. "Oh, I'm sure." He ignored his sensei's chuckling before glancing down at his daughter. "How are you, Satsu-chan?" Satsushiki was silent for several seconds before a giant grin split across her feature. "Papa." She all but launched herself into his arms, spearing into him and causing him to take a step back. The blonde father released a hearty chuckle as he held the girl up, returning her boisterous greeting. "Ah, come on Satsu-chan," he playfully teased. "I've got an image to uphold. I can't be seen being hugged to death." The little girl shook her head fiercely, uncaring of how she was acting. "Don't care." Naruto's eyes softened at his daughter's words. He wordlessly adjusted the girl, pulling her closer and gently stroking her back. His eyes narrowed for a moment as he looked towards Kakashi. A silent conversation was had as both men nodded their heads. "Come on, Satsu-chan. I'm taking today off." "Really?" she exclaimed loudly. The sheer amount of enjoyment and excitement in her eyes made the regret in Naruto's heart only grow. How had he been so blind to this before? "Of course, my little snuggle bug," he teased lightly, chuckling at the embarrassed expression on her face. "Father," she mumbled quietly, face squirming against his chest at the embarrassing nickname. "Ah, don't like your nickname anymore. It's okay. You'll always be Papa's little snuggle bug." "Father," she all but screamed in embarrassment, face flaming at the nickname. Naruto released a hearty chuckle at his daughter's embarrassment before disappearing in a golden flash with the girl attached to his chest. As he spent the entirety of the day with his daughter, his thoughts would always drift to the words spoken by his wife. Seeing the sheer joy in her eyes as they did mundane things around the village truly put into perspective what he had been doing. Satsushiki. She was his life now. He had sired the girl. She was a piece of him, given life and independent thought. The love and joy that came with knowing that a piece of you would always exist in this world. He just couldn't explain it. Kaguya had been right. He would tear this world asunder just to protect her. He'd move mountains, fall entire armies and villages, and exterminate anyone who so much as thought of harming her. When his wife had told him that one day he'd have to choose between Satsushiki and the village, he hadn't thought it would take such a short time to come to a conclusion. His entire life and dream had been about becoming Hokage. It then extended into bringing his old sensei's dream to fruition. To make peace in the elemental nations. He had accomplished both of these dreams and had done so much to maintain them. But as he stared at this little girl, with hair as white as snow and eyes full of joy and excitement, he'd choose her over the elemental nations any day. "I will love you always, Satsushiki." Bada boom. This is likely the conclusion of this story. You all finally got a look at Kaguya and Naruto's child. And just when Naruto thought life couldn't get more complicated, he found himself falling for the most dangerous woman alive. But is Kaguya hiding more than just her feelings? In a world where love defies fate, nothing will ever be the same again.